Random House Audiobooks presents Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton. Read for you by Victor Garber, with commentary provided by Michael Crichton.
The Ibn Fadlan manuscript is the earliest known eyewitness account of Viking life and society. It's an extraordinary document describing in vivid detail events which occurred more than 1,000 years ago. The manuscript has not, of course, survived intact over that enormous span of time. In June AD 921, the Caliph of Baghdad sent a member of his court, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, as ambassador to the king of the Bulgars. Ibn Fadlan was going 3 years on his journey, and he never actually accomplished his mission, because along the way he encountered a company of Norsemen, and he had many adventures among them. When he finally returned to Baghdad, Ibn Fadlan recorded his experiences in an official report to the court. That original manuscript has long since disappeared, and to reconstruct it, we have to rely on partial fragments preserved in later sources. The task of collating these many versions and translations, ranging over more than 1,000 years and appearing in Arabic, Latin, German, French, Danish, Swedish, and English, is an undertaking of formidable proportions. Only a person of great erudition and energy would even attempt it, and in 1951 such a person did. Per Fraus-Dolus, Professor Emeritus of Comparative Literature at the University of Oslo in Norway, compiled all the known sources and began the massive task of translation which occupied him until his death in 1957. In preparing this full and annotated version of the Fraus-Dolus translation, I myself have made few alterations. I deleted some repetitive passages, and I altered the original syntax so that the meaning is clearer. Ibn Fadlan's portrait of the Vikings differs markedly from the traditional view of these people. The first European descriptions of the Vikings were recorded by clergy. They were the only people of the time who could write, and they viewed the pagan Northmen with special horror. Here is a typically hyperbolic passage cited by D.M. Wilson from a 12th century Irish writer. In a word, although there were 100 hard-steeled iron heads on one neck, and 100 sharp, ready, cool, never-rusting brazen tongues in each head, they could not recount or narrate, enumerate or tell what all the Irish suffered in every house from those valiant, wrathful, purely pagan people. Modern scholars recognize that these blood-curdling accounts of the Vikings are vastly exaggerated. Yet European writers still tend to dismiss the Scandinavians as bloody barbarians, irrelevant to the main flow of Western culture. This situation is understandable only if we recognize a long-standing European bias. Every Western schoolchild dutifully learns that the Near East is the cradle of civilization. From here, civilization spread to Crete and Greece, then to Rome, and eventually to the barbarians of Northern Europe. What these barbarians were doing while they waited for the arrival of civilization was not known, nor was the question often asked. We should recognize, first of all, that what we call the Vikings were scattered in individual parties of seafarers who came from a vast geographical area. Scandinavia is larger than Portugal, Spain, and France combined, and who sailed from their individual feudal states for the purpose of trade or piracy or both. In fact, for a people who lack civilization, the Vikings demonstrate remarkably sustained and purposeful behavior. As proof of widespread trading, Arabic coins appear in Scandinavia as early as AD 692. During the next 400 years, Viking trader pirates expanded as far west as Newfoundland, as far south as Sicily and Greece, and as far east as the Ural Mountains of Russia, where their traders linked up to caravans arriving from the silk routes of China. The Vikings were not empire builders, and it's popular to say that their influence across this vast area was impermanent. Yet it was sufficiently permanent to lend place names to many localities in England, while to Russia they gave the very name of the nation itself, from the Norse tribe Rus. As for the more subtle influence of pagan vigor, relentless energy, and their system of values, the manuscript of Ibn Fadlan shows us how many typically Norse attitudes have been preserved to the present day. We should say something about Ibn Fadlan, the man who speaks to us with such a distinctive voice, despite the passage of more than 1,000 years and the filter of translators from a dozen linguistic and cultural traditions. We know almost nothing about him personally. Apparently he was educated, and from his exploits he could not have been very old. He states explicitly that he is a familiar of the Caliph, whom he did not particularly admire. In this he was not alone, for the Caliph was twice deposed and finally slain by one of his own officers. Of his society we know more. In the 10th century, Baghdad, the city of peace, was the most civilized city on earth. More than 1 million inhabitants lived within its famous circular walls. It was the focus of intellectual and commercial excitement in an environment of extraordinary grace, elegance, and splendor. There were perfumed gardens, cool, shady arbors, and the accumulated riches of a vast empire. The Arabs of Baghdad were Muslim and fiercely dedicated to that religion, but they were also exposed to people who looked, acted, and believed very differently from them. The Arabs were, in fact, the least provincial people in the world at that time. Ibn Fadlan himself is clearly an observant man, and he reports what he sees with remarkably little condescension. His manner of reporting may seem eccentric to Western sensibilities. He doesn't tell a story as we're accustomed to hearing one. We tend to forget that our own sense of drama originates in an oral tradition. Our oldest stories, the Iliad, Beowulf, the Song of Roland, were all intended to be sung by singers whose chief function and first obligation was entertainment. But Ibn Fadlan was a writer, and his principal aim was not entertainment. On the contrary, he was an ambassador delivering a report. His tone is that of a tax auditor. Indeed, he often slights the most exciting elements of his narrative rather than let them interfere with his clear and level-headed account. At times, this dispassion is so irritating we fail to recognize how extraordinary a spectator he really is. For hundreds of years after Ibn Fadlan, the tradition among travelers was to write wildly speculative, fanciful chronicles of foreign marvels, talking animals, feathered men who flew, encounters with behemoths and unicorns, and so on. But Ibn Fadlan never speculates. Every word rings true, and whenever he reports by hearsay, he is careful to say so. He is equally careful to specify when he's an eyewitness. That's why he uses the phrase, "I saw with my own eyes," over and over. In the end, it is the quality of absolute truthfulness which makes his tale so horrifying. For his encounter with the monsters of the mist, the eaters of the dead, is told with the same attention to detail, the same careful skepticism that marks other portions of his manuscript. In any case, the listener may judge for himself. I will offer comments only to clarify particulars in the story that may be mystifying to modern ears.
Eaters of the Dead. The departure from the city of peace. Praise be to God, the merciful, the compassionate, the Lord of the two worlds, and blessing and peace upon the Prince of Prophets, our Lord and Master Muhammad, whom God bless and preserve with abiding and continuing peace and blessings until the day of the faith. This is the book of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, ibn al-Abbas, ibn Rasid, ibn Hamad, a client of Muhammad ibn Suleiman, the ambassador from Al-Muqtadir, to the king of the Sakaliba, in which he recounts what he saw in the land of the Turks, the Hazars, the Sakaliba, the Baskirs, the Rus, and the Northmen. The letter of the Yiltuar, king of the Sakaliba, reached the commander of the faithful, Al-Muqtadir. He asked him therein to send someone who would instruct him in religion and make him acquainted with the laws of Islam, who would build for him a mosque and erect for him a pulpit from which might be carried out the mission of converting his people in all the districts of his kingdom, and also for advice in the construction of fortifications and defense works. And he prayed the Caliph to do these things. The commander of the faithful Al-Muqtadir, as many know, was not a strong and just Caliph, but drawn to pleasures and the flattering speeches of his officers, who played him the fool and jested mightily behind his back. I was not of this company, for the reason that follows. In the city of Peace lived an elderly merchant of the name Ibn Quarin. He hoarded his gold and likewise his young wife, whom none had ever seen. On a certain day, the Caliph sent me to deliver to Ibn Quarin a message, and I presented myself to the house of the merchant and sought entrance therein with my letter and seal. Until today, I do not know the import of the letter, but it does not matter. The merchant was not at home. Thus the door servant admitted me into the house, and I waited all day, growing hungry and thirsty. In the heat of the afternoon, when all about me the house was still and the servants slept, I too felt drowsy. Then before me I saw an apparition in white, a woman young and beautiful, whom I took to be the very wife no man had ever seen. She did not speak, but led me to another room, and there locked the door. I enjoyed her upon the spot. Thus did the afternoon pass quickly, until we heard the master of the house making his return. Immediately the wife arose and departed, having never uttered a word in my presence, and I was left to arrange my garments in some haste. The merchant Ibn Quarin found me in the adjoining room, and he viewed me with suspicion, asking why I should be there and not in the courtyard, where it was proper for a messenger to wait. I replied that I was famished and faint, and had searched for food and shade. This was a poor lie, and he did not believe it. He complained to the Caliph, who I know was amused in private, yet compelled to adopt a stern face to the public. Thus, when the ruler of the Sakaliba asked for a mission from the Caliph, this same spiteful Ibn Quarin urged I be sent, and so I was. In our company, there was the ambassador of the king of Sakaliba, who was called Abdallah ibn Bastu al-Hazari, a tedious and windy man who talked overmuch. There was also Takin al-Turki, Bars al-Saklabi, both guides on the journey, and I too. We bore gifts for the ruler, for his wife, his children, and his generals. Also we brought certain drugs which were given over to the care of the Sasan al-Rasi. This was our party. So we started on Thursday, the 11th of Safar, of the year 309, June 21st, 921, from the city of Peace. We stopped a day in Narawan, and from there went swiftly until we reached Al-Taskara, where we stopped for 3 days. Then we traveled straight onward without any detours until we reached Hulwan. There we stayed 2 days. From there we went to Quirmissen, where we remained 2 days.
This passage gives the flavor of Ibn Fadlan's descriptions of travel. Perhaps a quarter of his entire manuscript is written in this fashion, simply listing the names of settlements and the number of days spent at each. Most of this material has been deleted. Apparently, Ibn Fadlan's party is traveling northward, and eventually they are required to halt for winter.
Our stay in Gurgania was lengthy. We stayed there some days of the month of Ragab, November, and during the whole of Saban, Ramadan, and Sawal. Our long stay was brought about by the cold and its bitterness. In this extremity of cold, I saw that the earth sometimes forms great cracks, and a large and ancient tree may split in 2 halves from this. About the middle of Sawal of the year 309, February 922, the weather began to change, the river thawed, and we got ourselves the necessary things for the journey. We bought Turkish camels and skin boats made out of camel hides in preparation for the rivers we would have to cross in the land of the Turks. We laid in a supply of bread, millet, and salted meat for 3 months. Each of us put on a jacket, over that a coat, over that a tulip, over that a burqa, and a helmet of felt, out of which only the 2 eyes could look. The doctor of the law and the teacher and the pages who travelled with us from Baghdad departed from us now, fearing to enter this new country. So I, the ambassador, his brother-in-law, and 2 pages, Takin and Bars, proceeded.
Throughout the manuscript, Ibn Fadlan is inexact about the size and composition of his party. He never states that his party is greater than a few individuals, when in fact it probably numbered 100 people or more, and twice as many horses and camels. But Ibn Fadlan literally does not count slaves and servants, and lesser members of the caravan.
The caravan was ready to start, and trusting in the all-powerful and exalted God, we started on Monday, the 3rd of Dukalka of the year 309, March 3rd, 922, from the town of Gorgonia. That same day, we stopped at the burg called Zamgan, that is the gateway to the Turks. The next morning we proceeded to Git. There so much snow fell that the camels plunged in it up to their knees. Hence we halted 2 days. Then we sped straight into the land of the Turks without meeting anyone on the barren steppe. We rode every day from midnight until the time of the afternoon prayer, and then we halted. When we had ridden 15 nights in this manner, we arrived at a large mountain. From this place we crossed on until we reached a Turkish tribe, which is called the Oghuz. The Oghuz are nomads and have houses of felt. Although they lead a hard existence, they are like asses gone astray. They have no religious bonds with God. They never pray, but instead call their headmen lords. Their undertakings are based upon counsel solely among themselves. I have heard them say, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah." But they speak thus so as to get close to any Muslims, and not because they believe it. The ruler of the Oghuz Turks is called Yabgu. That is the name of the ruler, and everyone who rules over this tribe bears the name. His subordinate is always called Kudarkin, and so each subordinate to the chieftain is called Kudarkin. The Oghuz do not wash themselves after either defecation or urination, nor do they bathe after ejaculation or on other occasions. They have nothing whatever to do with water. Oghuz women never veil themselves in the presence of their own men or others, nor does the woman cover any of her bodily parts in the presence of any person. Adultery is unknown among them. Whomsoever they find to be an adulterer, they tear him in two. This comes about so. They bring together the branches of 2 trees, tie him to the branches, and then let both trees go. The custom of pederasty is counted by the Turks a terrible sin. All the Turks pluck beards with the exception of their mustaches. At length we travelled on in the Turkish kingdom, and we travelled forth until we came to the river Bagindi. There we took our skin boats which had been made from camel hides, spread them out, and loaded the goods from the Turkish camels. When each boat was full, a group of 5, 6, or 4 men sat in them. They took birchwood branches in their hands and used them like oars. Finally we got across. With regard to the horses and camels, they came swimming across. Thus we crossed the river Bagindi and the river called Gam in the same way, then the Odil, then the Arden, then the Wars, then the Ati, then the Wubna. All these are big rivers. Then we arrived at the Pechenegs. They are dark brown, powerful people, and the men shave their beards. They are poor in contrast to the Oghuz, for I saw men among the Oghuz who possessed 10,000 horses and 100,000 sheep. But the Pechenegs are poor, and we remained only a day with them. Then we started out and came to the river Gaya. This is the largest, widest, swiftest that we saw. Verily I saw how a skin boat overturned in it, and those on it were drowned. Many of the company perished, and a number of the camels and horses were drowned. At length we arrived in the land of the Baskirs.
Ibn Fadlan suggests the Baskers are not worth bothering with, an uncharacteristic statement from this relentlessly curious traveler.
At length we left the land of the Baskirs and crossed the river Gurmsan, the river Ern, the river Wittig, the river Nabasin, then the river Gausin. Between the rivers that we mention, the distance is a journey of 2, 3, or 4 days in each case. Then we came to the land of the Bulgars, which begins at the shore of the river Volga. I saw with my own eyes how the Northmen had arrived with their wares and pitched their camp along the Volga. Never did I see a people so gigantic. They are tall as palm trees and florid and ruddy in complexion. They wear neither camisoles nor kaftans, but the men among them wear a garment of rough cloth, which is thrown over one side so that one hand remains free. Every Northman carries an axe, a dagger, and a sword, and without these weapons they are never seen. Their swords are broad, with wavy lines, and of Frankish make. From the tip of the fingernails to the neck, each man of them is tattooed with pictures of trees, living beings, and other things. The women carry fastened to their breast a little case of iron, copper, silver, or gold, according to the wealth and resources of their husbands. Fastened to the case they wear a ring, and upon that a dagger, all attached to their breast. About their necks they wear gold and silver chains. They are the filthiest race that God ever created. They do not wipe themselves after going to stool, or wash themselves after a nocturnal pollution, any more than if they were wild asses. They come from their own country, anchor their ships in the Volga, which is a great river, and build large wooden houses on its banks. In every such house there live 10 or 20. Each man has a couch where he sits with the beautiful girls he has for sale. He is as likely as not to enjoy one of them while a friend looks on. At times several of them will be thus engaged at the same moment, each in full view of the others. Every morning a slave girl comes and brings a tub of water and places it before her master. He proceeds to wash his face and hands, and then his hair, combing it over the vessel. Thereupon he blows his nose and spits into the tub, and leaving no dirt behind, conveys it all into this water. When he has finished, the girl carries the tub to the man next to him, who does the same. Thus she continues until each of those who are in the house has blown his nose and spit into the tub and washed his face and hair. This is the normal way of things among the Northmen, as I have seen with my own eyes. Yet at the period of our arrival among them, there was some discontent among the giant people, the nature of which was thus. Their principal chieftain, a man of the name Wiglaf, had fallen ill, and was set up in a sick tent at a distance from the camp, with bread and water. No one approached or spoke to him, or visited him the whole time. No slave nurtured him, for the Northmen believe that a man must recover from any sickness according to his own strength. Many among them believed that Wiglaf would never return to join them in the camp, but instead would die. Now one of their number, a young noble called Bulawif, was chosen to be their new leader, but he was not accepted while the sick chieftain still lived. This was the cause of uneasiness at the time of our arrival. Yet also there was no aspect of sorrow or weeping among the people encamped on the Volga. The Northmen place great importance on the duty of the host. They greet every visitor with warmth and hospitality, much food and clothing, and the earls and nobles compete for the honor of the greatest hospitality. The party of our caravan was brought before Bulawif, and a great feast was given us. Over this Bulawif himself presided, and I saw him to be a tall man and strong, with skin and hair and beard of pure white. He had the bearing of a leader. Recognizing the honor of the feast, our party made a show of eating, yet the food was vile, and the manner of the feast contained much throwing of food and drink, and great laughing and merriment. It was common in the middle of this rude banquet for an earl to disport with a slave girl in full view of his fellows. Seeing this, I turned away and said, "I beg God's pardon." And the Northmen laughed much at my discomfiture. One of their number translated for me that they believe God looks favorably upon such open pleasures. He said to me, "You Arabs are like old women. You tremble at the sight of life." I said in answer, "I am a guest among you, and Allah shall lead me to righteousness." This was reason for greater laughter, but I do not know for what cause they should find a joke. The custom of the Northmen reveres the life of war. Verily, these huge men fight continually. They are never at peace, neither among themselves nor among different tribes of their kind. They sing songs of their warfare and bravery, and believe that the death of a warrior is the highest honor. At the banquet of Bulawif, a member of their kind sang a song of bravery and battle that was much enjoyed, though little attended. The strong drink of the Northmen soon renders them as animals and stray asses. In the midst of the song there was ejaculation, and also mortal combat over some intoxicated quarrel of two warriors. The bard did not cease his song through all these events. Verily, I saw flying blood spatter his face, and yet he wiped it away without a pause in his singing. This impressed me greatly. Now it happened that this Bulawif, who was as drunk as the rest, commanded that I should sing a song for them. Not wishing to anger him, I recited from the Quran, with the translator repeating my words in their Norse tongue. I was received no better than their own minstrel, and afterward I asked the forgiveness of Allah for the treatment of His holy words. We had stayed 2 days among the Northmen, and on the morning we planned to leave, we were told by the translator that the chieftain Wiglaf had died. I sought to witness what then befell. First they laid him in his grave, over which a roof was erected, for the space of 10 days, until they had completed the cutting and sewing of his clothes. They also brought together his goods and divided them into 3 parts. The first of these is for his family, the second is expended for the garments they make, and with the third they purchase strong drink, against the day when a girl resigns herself to death and is burned with her master. To the use of wine they abandon themselves in mad fashion, drinking it day and night, as I have already said. Not seldom does one die with a cup in his hand. The family of Wiglaf asked of all his girls and pages, "Which of you will die with him?" Then one of them answered, "I." From the time she uttered that word, she was no longer free. Should she wish to draw back, she is not permitted. The girl who spoke was then committed to 2 other girls, who were to keep watch over her. During the whole of this period, the girl gave herself over to drinking and singing, and was cheerful and gay. During this time, Bulawif found a rival whose name was Thorkel. Him I did not know, but he was ugly and foul, a dark man among this ruddy fair race. He plotted to be chieftain himself. All this I learned from the translator, for there was not outward sign in the funeral preparations that anything was not according to custom. Bulawif himself did not direct the preparations, for he was not of the family of Wiglaf. Bulawif joined in the general merriment and celebration, and acted no part of kingly conduct, except during the banquets of the night, when he sat in the high seat that was reserved for the king. This was the manner of his sitting. When a Northman is truly king, he sits at the head of the table in a large stone chair with stone arms. Such was the chair of Wiglaf. But Bulawif did not sit in it as a normal man would sit. Instead, he sat upon one arm, a position from which he fell when he drank overmuch or laughed with great excess. It was the custom that he could not sit in the chair until Wiglaf was buried. All this time, Thorkel plotted and conferred among the other earls. I came to know that I was suspected as some sorcerer or witch, which distressed me much. The translator, who did not believe these tales, told me that Thorkel said I had caused Wiglaf to die, and had caused Bulawif to be the next chief. Yet verily I had no part in any of this. After some days, I sought to leave with my party of Ibn Bastu and Takin and Bars, and yet the Northmen would not permit us to leave, saying that we must stay to the funeral, and threatening us with their daggers. Thus we stayed. When the day was come that Wiglaf and the girl were to be committed to the flames, his ship was drawn ashore on the banks of the river. Next they brought a couch, placed it in the ship, and covered it with Greek cloth of gold. There then came an old crone, whom they call the Angel of Death, and she spread the personal articles on the couch. It was she who was to slay the girl. I saw the crone with my own eyes. She was dark, thick-set, with a lowering countenance. When they came to the grave, they removed the roof and drew out the dead man. Then I saw that he had turned quite black by reason of the coldness of that country. Now I saw Bullawif and Thorkel standing side by side, making a great show of friendship during the burial ceremony, and yet it was apparent that there was no truth to their appearances. The dead king was now clothed in a caftan of gold cloth. Then he was carried to a tent in the ship. They seated him on a quilted couch, supported him with pillows, and brought strong drink, fruits and basil, which they placed alongside him. Then they brought a dog, which they cut in two and threw into the ship. They laid all his weapons beside him, and led up 2 horses, whereupon Bullawif killed one with his sword, and Thorkel killed the second, cutting them into pieces with their swords, and flinging the pieces forth into the ship. The girl who had devoted herself to death meanwhile walked to and fro, entering one after another of the tents that they had there. The occupant of each tent lay with her, saying, "Tell your master I did this only for love of him." Now it was late in the afternoon. They led the girl away to the ship, but did not yet admit her to the tent. Now the men came up with shields and staves, and handed her a cup of strong drink. This she took, and sang over it, and emptied it. The interpreter told me, she said, "With this I take leave of those who are dear to me." Then another cup was handed to her. The crone admonished her to drain the cup without lingering, and to enter the tent where her master lay. By this time it seemed to me the girl had become dazed. She made as though she would enter the tent, when suddenly the hag seized her by the head and dragged her in. At this moment the men began to beat upon their shields with the staves, in order to drown the noise of her outcries, which might have terrified the other girls and deterred them from seeking death with their masters in the future. 6 men followed her into the tent, and each and every one of them had carnal companionship with her. Then they laid her down by her master's side, while 2 of the men seized her feet and 2 the hands. The old woman, known as the Angel of Death, now knotted a rope around her neck and handed the ends to 2 of the men to pull. Then, with a broad-bladed dagger, she smote her between the ribs, and she drew the blade forth, while the 2 men strangled her with the rope till she died. The kin of the dead Wiglaf now drew near, and taking a piece of lighted wool, walked backward naked toward the ship, and ignited the ship without ever looking at it. The funeral pyre was soon aflame, and the ship, the tent, the man, and the girl, and everything else blew up in a blazing storm of fire. At my side, one of the Northmen made some comment to the interpreter. I asked the interpreter what was said, and received this answer. "You Arabs," he said, "must be a stupid lot. You take your most beloved and revered man, and cast him into the ground to be devoured by creeping things and worms. We, on the other hand, burn him in a twinkling, so that instantly, without a moment's delay, he enters into paradise." And in truth, before an hour had passed, ship, wood, and girl had, with the man, turned to ashes. These Scandinavians find no cause for grief in any man's death. On the same evening of the funeral of the chief called Wiglaf, there was great feasting in the halls of the Northmen encampment. Yet I perceived that all was not fitting among these barbarians. I sought counsel with my interpreter. He responded thusly, It is the plan of Thorkel to see you die, and then to banish Bullywif. Thorkel has gathered the support of some earls to himself, but there is dispute in every house and every quarter." Much distressed, I said, "I have no part in this affair. How shall I act?" The interpreter said I should flee if I could, but if I were caught, this would be proof of my guilt, and I would be treated as a thief. A thief is treated in this fashion. The Northmen lead him to a thick tree, fasten a strong rope about him, string him up, and let him hang until he rots to pieces by the action of the wind and rain. I chose to remain among the Northmen until I should be given free passage to continue on my journey. I inquired of the interpreter whether I should bear gifts to Bullywif, and also to Thorkel, to favor my departure. He said that I could not bear gifts to both, and that the matter was undecided who would be the new chieftain. Then he said it would be clear in one day and night, and no longer. For it is true among these Northmen that they have no established way of choosing a new chief when the old leader dies. Strength of arms counts high, but also allegiances of the warriors and the earls and noblemen. In some cases, there is no clear successor to the rule, and this was one of such eventualities. My interpreter said that I should bide my time and also pray. This I did. Then there came a great storm on the banks of the river Volga, a storm that persisted 2 days, with a driving rain and forceful winds. And after this storm a cold mist lay on the ground. It was thick and white, and a man could not see past 12 paces. Now these same giant Northmen warriors, who by virtue of their enormity and strength of arms and cruel disposition have nothing to fear in all the world, yet these men fear the mist or fog that comes with storms. The men of their race are at some pains to conceal their fear, even one from another. The warriors laugh and joke overmuch, and make unreasonable display of carefree emotion. Thus do they prove the reverse, and in truth their attempt is childish. So plainly do they pretend not to see the truth, yet verily each and all of them, throughout their encampment, are making prayers and sacrifices of hen and cocks, and if a man is asked the reason of the sacrifice, he will say, "I make sacrifice for the safety of my faraway family," or he will say, "I make sacrifice in honor of such or another deceased member of my family," or he will say many other reason, and then he will add, "and also for the lifting of the mist." Now I accounted it strange for such strong and warlike people to be so fearful of anything as to pretend a lack of fear. And of all the sensible reasons for fear, mist or fog seemed to my way of thinking very greatly inexplicable. I said to my interpreter that a man could fear wind, or blasting storms of sand, or water floods, or heaving of the ground, or thunder and lightning within the sky, for all of these could injure a man, or kill him, or ruin his dwelling. Yet I said that fog or mist contained no threat of harm. In truth, it was the least of any form of changing elements. The interpreter answered to me that I was lacking the beliefs of a sailor. He said that many Arab sailors agreed with the Northmen in the matter of uneasiness within the wrapping of mist. So also, he said, all seafarers are made anxious of any mist or fog, because such a condition increases the peril of travel upon the waters. I said this was sensible, but that when the mist lay upon the land and not the water, I did not understand the reason for any fear. To this the interpreter replied, "The fog is always feared whenever it comes." And he said that it made no difference on land or water according to the Northman view. And then he said to me the Northmen did not truly much fear the mist. Also the interpreter said that he, as a man, did not fear the mist. He said that it was only a minor matter of slight consequence. He said, "It is as a minor ache inside a limb joint, which may come with fog, but no more important." By this I saw that my interpreter, among the others, denied all manner of concern for the fog, and feigned indifference. In this same day, there arrived a Northman boat containing a noble of their own race. He was a young man with a thin beard, and he travelled with only a small party of pages and slaves. This same visitor beached his boat and remained standing with it until nightfall, and no man came near to him or greeted him, although he was a stranger and in plain sight to all. My interpreter said, "He is a kin of Bullywif, and he will be received at the night banquet." I said, "Why does he stay at his ship?" "Because of the mist. It is the custom he must stand in view for many hours, so all can see him and know he is no enemy coming from the mist." This the interpreter said to me with much hesitation. At the night banquet, I saw the young man come into the hall. Here he was warmly greeted, and with much display of surprise, and in this most especially by Bullywif, who acted as if the young man had just arrived, and had not been standing by his ship many hours. After the several greetings, the youth spoke a passionate speech, which Bullywif attended with unusual interest. He did not drink and dally with the slave girls, but instead, in silence, heard the youth, who spoke in a high and cracking voice. At the finish of the tale, the youth seemed about to have tears, and was given a cup of drink. I inquired of my interpreter what was said. "He is Wulfgar, and he is the son of Hrothgar, a great king in the north. He is kin of Bullywif, and seeks his aid and support on a hero's mission. Wulfgar says the far country suffers a dread and nameless terror, which all the peoples are powerless to oppose, and he asks Bullywif to make haste to return to the far country and save his people and the kingdom of his father, Hrothgar." I inquired of the interpreter the nature of this terror. "It has no name which I can tell." The interpreter seemed much disturbed by Wulfgar's words, and so also were many other Northmen. I inquired of the interpreter details of the menace. "The name cannot be said, for it is forbidden to speak it, lest the utterance of the name call forth the demons." And as he spoke, I saw that he was fearful just to think upon these matters, and his pallor was marked, and so I ended my inquiry. Bullywif, sitting at the high stone throne, was silent. Never had I seen the merry and rambunctious North people so subdued. Then into the hall entered the old crone called the Angel of Death, and she sat beside Bullywif. From a hide bag she withdrew some bones, whether human or animal I do not know, and these bones she cast upon the ground, speaking low utterances, and she passed her hand over them. The bones were gathered up and cast again, and the process repeated with more incantations. Now again was the casting done, and finally she spoke to Bullywif. Then Bullywif stood and raised his cup of strong drink, and called to the assembled earls and warriors, making a speech of some good length. One by one, several warriors stood at their places to face him. Not all stood. I counted 11, and Bullywif pronounced himself satisfied with this. Now also I saw that Thorkel appeared much pleased by the proceedings, and assumed a more kingly bearing, while Bullywif paid him no heed, or showed any hatred of him, or even any interest, although they were formerly enemies a few minutes past. Then the Angel of Death pointed to me, and made some utterance, and then she departed the hall. Now at last my interpreter spoke. "Bullywif is called by the gods to leave this place, and swiftly, putting behind him all his cares and concerns, to act as a hero to repel the menace in the north. This is fitting, and he must also take 11 warriors with him, and so also must he take you." I said that I was on a mission to the Bulgars and must follow the instructions of my Caliph with no delay. "The Angel of Death has spoken. The party of Bullywif must be 13, and of these one must be no Northman, and so you shall be the 13th. I protested that I was not a warrior. Verily, I made all the excuses and pleadings that I could imagine might have effect upon this rude company of beings. I demanded the interpreter convey my words to Bullywith, and yet he turned away and left the hall, saying this last speech. "Prepare yourself as you think best. You shall leave on the morning light." In this manner was I prevented from continuing my travels to the kingdom of the Yiltuar, king of the Sakaliba, and thus was I unable to discharge the trust of Al-Muqtadir, commander of the faithful and caliph of the city of peace. I gave such instructions as I could to Dadir al-Harami, also to the ambassador Abdallah ibn Bathu al-Hazari, and also the pages Takin and Bars. Then I took my leave of them, and how they fared further I never knew. For myself, I counted my condition no different from a dead man. I was on board one of the Northman vessels, and sailing up the Volga River northward with 12 of their company. The others were named thus: Bullywith, the chief, his lieutenant or captain Ecthgau, his earls and nobles Higlak, Skeld, Weof, Ronoth, Halga, his warriors and brave fighters Helfdane, Edthgo, Rethel, Haltef, and Herger.
Wulfgar was left behind. Jensen says that the Northmen commonly held a messenger as hostage, and this was why appropriate messengers were the sons of kings or high nobles or other persons who had some value to their own community, which made them fitting hostages. Olaf Jorgensen says that Wulfgar remained behind because he was afraid to go back.
And also I was among them, unable to speak their language or to understand their ways, for my interpreter had been left behind. It was only happenstance and the grace of Allah that one of their warriors, Herger, should be a man of parts and knowing some of the Latin tongue. Thus could I understand from Herger what meant the events that transpired. Herger was a young warrior and very merry. He seemed to find jest in everything, and especially in my own gloom at the departure. These Northmen are by their own accounting the best sailors in the world, and I saw much love of the oceans and waters in their demeanor. Of the ship there is this: it was as long as 25 paces, and as broad as 8, and little more than that, and of excellent construction of oak wood. Its color was black. It was fitted with a square sail of cloth and trimmed with sealskin ropes. The helmsman stood upon a small platform near the stern, and worked a rudder attached to the side of the vessel. The ship was fitted with benches for oars, but never were the oars employed. Rather, we progressed by sailing alone. At the head of the ship was the wooden carving of a fierce sea monster, such as appears on some Northman vessels. Also, there was a tail at the stern. In water, this ship was stable and quite pleasant for traveling, and the confidence of the warriors elevated my spirits. Near the helmsman was a bed of skins arranged upon a network of ropes, with a skin covering. This was the bed of Bullywith. The other warriors slept upon the deck, wrapping skins about them, and I did as much also. We travelled upon the river for 3 days, passing many small settlements at the edge of the water. Then we came upon a large encampment in a bend in the river Volga. Here were many hundreds of people and a town of good size, and in the center of the town a Kremlin, or fortress, with earthen walls and all of impressive dimensions. Herger said to me, "This is the city of Bulgar, of the kingdom of the Sakaliba. That is the Kremlin of the Yiltuar, king of the Sakaliba." I replied, "This is the very king I was sent to see as emissary from my caliph." And with many entreaties I requested to be put upon that shore. Also I demanded and made a show of anger to the extent that I dared. Verily, the Northman paid me no heed. Herger laughed into my face, and turned his attention to the sailing of the ship. Thus the Northman's vessel sailed past the city of Bulgar, so close upon the shore that I heard the shouts of merchants and the bleating of sheep, and yet I was helpless and could do nothing save witness the sight with my eyes. After the passing of an hour, even this was refused me. For the Bulgar city is at the bend of the river, as I have said, and soon absent from my view. Thus did I enter and leave Bulgaria.
The listener may now be hopelessly confused about geography. Modern Bulgaria is one of the Balkan states. It's bordered by Greece, Yugoslavia, Romania, and Turkey. But from the 9th to the 15th centuries, there was another Bulgaria, on the banks of the Volga, roughly 600 miles east of modern Moscow, and this is where Ibn Fadlan was heading.
Then passed 8 more days travelling the Volga River, and the land was more mountainous about the valley of the river. Now we came to another branching of the river, where it is called by the Northmen the Oker, and we continued on for 10 days farther. The air was chill, and the wind strong, and much snow lay still upon the ground. They have many great forests also in this region, which the Northmen call Vada. Then we came to a camp of North people, which was Masborg. This town lives by the sale of foodstuff to traders who come back and forth along this route. At Masborg we left our vessel and travelled overland by horse for 18 days. This was a difficult mountain region and exceedingly cold, and I was much exhausted by the rigours of the journey. These North people never travel at night. Yet this was the occurrence. During our travels, the period of the night became so short you could not cook a pot of meat in the time of it. Verily, it seemed that as soon as I lay down to sleep, I was awakened by the Northmen who said, "Come, it is day, we must continue the journey." Nor was the sleep refreshing in these cold places. Also, Herger explained to me that in this north country the day is long in the summer, and the night is long in the winter, and rarely are they equal. Then he said to me I should watch in the night for the sky curtain, and upon one evening I did, and I saw in the sky shimmering pale lights of green and yellow, and sometimes blue, which hung as a curtain in the high air. I was much amazed by the sight of this sky curtain, but the Northmen counted nothing strange. Now we travelled for 5 days down from the mountains into a region of forests. The forests of the Northlands are cold and dense with gigantic trees. It is a wet and chilling land, in some locations so green that the eyes ache from the brightness of the colour. Yet in other locations it is black and dark and menacing. Now we travelled 7 days farther through the forests, and we experienced much rain. These Northmen feared no robbers in the forests, and whether from their own great strength or the lack of any bandits, in truth, we met no one in the forests. The North Country has few people of any sort, or so it appeared during my sojourn there. We often travelled 7 days or 10 without viewing any settlement or farm or dwelling. It rained many days. Many times at night it rained, and we sought shelter beneath large trees. Yet we arose drenched, and our sleeping skins drenched likewise. The Northmen did not grumble at this, for they are cheerful at all times. I alone grumbled, and mightily. They paid me no attention. Finally I said to Herger, "The rain is cold." To this he laughed. "How can the rain be cold? You are cold and you are unhappy. The rain is not cold or unhappy." I saw that he believed this foolishness, and truly thought me foolish to think otherwise, and yet I did. Now it happened that one night while we ate, I said over my food, "In the name of God," and Bullywif inquired of Herger what it was I said. I told to Herger that I believed food must be consecrated, and so I did this according to my beliefs. Bullywif said to me, "This is the way of the Arabs?" Herger was the translator. I made this reply, "No, for in truth he who kills the food must make the consecration. I speak the words so as not to be forgetful."
This is a typically Muslim sentiment. Sin for a Muslim is forgetfulness in carrying out the prescribed daily rituals of the religion. As a corollary, it is a more serious offense to forget the ritual entirely than to remember the ritual and yet fail to carry it out, either through extenuating circumstances or personal inadequacy. Thus Ibn Fadlan is saying, in effect, that he is mindful of proper conduct even though he is not acting according to it. This is better than nothing.
This the Northmen found a reason for humour. They laughed heartily. Then Bullywif said to me, "Can you draw sounds?" I understood he meant writing. I replied to Bullywif that I could write and also read. He said that I should write for him upon the ground. In the light of the evening fire, I took a stick and wrote, "Praise be to God." All the Northmen looked at the writing. I was commanded to speak what it said, and this I did. Now Bullywhip stared at the writing for a long period, his head sunk upon his chest. Herger said to me, "Which God do you praise?" I answered that I praised the one God whose name was Allah. Herger said, "One God cannot be enough." Now we travelled another day, and on the next evening, Bullywhip took a stick and drew in the earth what I had formerly drawn, and commanded me to read. I spoke aloud the words, "Praise be to God." At this, Bullywhip was satisfied, and I saw that he had contrived a test of me, placing in his memory the symbols I had drawn to show them to me again. Now Ecthgo, the lieutenant or captain of Bullywhip, and a warrior less merry than the others, a stern man, spoke to me through Herger. "Ecthgo wishes to know if you can draw the sound of his name." I said that I could, and I took up the stick and began to draw in the dirt. At once Ecthgo leapt up, flung away the stick, and stamped out my writing. He spoke angry words. Herger said to me, "Ecthgo does not wish you to draw his name at any time, and this you must promise." Here I was perplexed, and I saw that Ecthgo was angry with me in the extreme. So also were the others, staring at me with concern and anger. I promised to Herger that I would not draw the name of Ecthgo or of any of the others. At this they were all relieved. After this, no more was my writing discussed, but Bullywhip gave certain instructions, and whenever it rained, I was always directed to the largest tree, and I was given more food than before. Not always did we sleep in the forests, nor did we always ride through the forests. At the border of some forests, Bullywhip and his warriors would plunge forward, riding at a gallop through the dense trees without a care or a thought of fear. And then again, at other forests, he would draw up and pause, and the warriors would dismount and burn a fire and make some offering of food or a few sheets of hard bread before continuing further, and then they would ride around the edge of the forest. I inquired of Herger why this should be. He said that some forests were safe and some were not, but did not explain further. I asked him, "What is not safe in the forests that are judged so?" He made this reply, "There are things that no man can conquer, and no sword can kill, and no fire can burn, and such things are in the forests." "How is this known to be?" At this he laughed and said, "You Arabs always wish to have reasons for everything. Your hearts are a great bursting bag of reasons." I said, "And you do not care for reason?" "It avails you nothing. We say a man should be moderately wise, but not over-wise, lest he know his fate in advance. The man whose mind is most free of care does not know his fate in advance." Now I saw that I must be content with his answer, for it was true that upon one occasion or another I would make some manner of inquiry, and Herger would reply, and if I did not comprehend his answer, I would ask further, and he would reply further. Yet again, when I made of him an inquiry, he would reply in short fashion, as if the inquiry were of no substance, and then I would have nothing further from him, save a shaking of his head. Now we continue on. Verily, I can say that some of the forests in the wild north country do provoke a feeling of fear, for which I cannot account. At night, sitting about the fire, the Northmen told stories of dragons and fierce beasts, and also of their ancestors who had slain these creatures. These, they said, were the source of my fear. But they told the stories with no show of fear, and of such beasts I saw nothing with my own eyes. One night I heard a grumbling that I took to be thunder, but they said it was the growl of a dragon in the forest. I do not know what is the truth, and report now only what was said to me. The people of this region are pale as linen, and their hair is very fair. After so many days of travel, I saw no dark people at all, and indeed I was marveled at by the inhabitants of that region on account of my skin and dark hair. Many times a farmer or his wife or daughter would come forth to touch me with a stroking motion. Herger laughed and said they were trying to brush away the color, thinking it to be painted upon my flesh. They are ignorant people with no knowledge of the wideness of the world. Many times they feared me and would not approach me close. At one place a child cried out in terror and ran to cling to his mother when he saw me. At this the warriors of Bullywif laughed with great merriment. But now I observed this thing. With the passing of the days, the warriors of Bullywif ceased to laugh and fell into an ill humor, more each day. Herger said to me they were thinking of drink, of which we had been deprived for many days. At each farm or dwelling, Bullywif and his warriors asked for drink, but in these poor places there was often no liquor. At length we arrived at a village, and there the warriors found drink, and all of the Northmen became intoxicated in a moment, drinking in raucous fashion, heedless that the liquor poured over their chins and clothing in their haste. In truth, one of the company, the solemn warrior Ecthgau, was so demented from liquor that he was drunk, while still upon his horse, and fell while attempting to dismount. Now the horse kicked him in the head, and I feared for his safety. But Ecthgau laughed and kicked the horse back. We remained in the village for the space of 2 days. I was much amazed, for previously the warriors had shown great haste and purpose in their journey, yet all was now abandoned to drink and stuporous slumber. Then upon the 3rd day, Bullywif directed that we should continue, and the warriors proceeded, I among them, and they accounted the loss of 2 days nothing strange. How many days further we travelled, I am not certain. I know that 5 times we changed horses for fresh mounts, paying for these in the villages with gold and with the little green shells that the Northmen value more highly than any other objects in the world. And at length we came to a village of the name Lenneborg, situated by the sea. Here we took another vessel. I was afraid to go upon this sea, for the water was rough and very cold. A man's hand plunged into that sea would lack all feeling in an instant. And yet the Northmen were cheerful, and joked and drank for an evening in this sea village of Lenneborg, and disported themselves with many of the women and slave girls. This, I was told, is the Northman's custom before a sea voyage, for no man knows if he shall survive the journey, and thus he departs with excessive revelry. In every place we were greeted with great hospitality, for that is considered a virtue by these people. The poorest farmer would set all he had before us, and this without fear that we would kill or rob him, but only out of goodness and grace. The Northmen, I learned, do not countenance robbers or killers of their own race, and treat such men harshly. These beliefs they hold despite the truth of the matter, which is that they are always drunk and brawling like unreasoning animals, and killing each other in hot duels. Yet they do not see this as murder, and any man who murders will be himself killed. Further, I saw that in each place where we rested, the people inquired of Bullywif what quest he had undertaken, and when they were informed of its nature, that which I did not yet comprehend, he and his warriors, and I among them, were accorded the highest respect, receiving their prayers and sacrifices and tokens of good wishes. At sea, as I have said, the Northmen become happy and jubilant, although the ocean was rough and forbidding to my way of thinking, and also to my stomach, which felt most delicate and unsettled. Indeed, I purged myself, and then asked Herger why his companions were so happy. "It is because we shall soon be at the home of Bullywif, the place known as Yatlam, where live his father and his mother and all his relatives, and he has not seen them for many long years." To this I said, "Are we not going to Wulfgar's land?" "Yes, but it is fitting that Bullywif must pay homage to his father and also his mother." I saw by their faces that all the other earls, nobles, and warriors were happy as Bullywif himself. I asked Herger why this was so. "Bullywif is our chief, and we are happy for him, and for the power that he will soon have." I inquired what was this power of which he spoke. The power of Runding, the power of the ancients, the power of the giants. The Northmen believe that in ages past, the world was populated by a race of giant men who have since vanished. The Northmen do not count themselves the descendants of these giants, but they have received some of the powers of these ancient giants in such ways as I do not understand well. These heathens also believe in many gods, who are themselves giants and who also have power. But the giants of which Herger spoke were giant men and not gods, or so it seemed to me. That night we beached upon a rocky shore, and there Bullywuff encamped with his men, and long into the night they drank and sang around the fire. Herger joined in the celebration, and had no patience to explain to me the meanings of the songs, and so I do not know what they sang, but they were happy. On the morrow they would come to the home of Bullywuff, the land called Yatlam. We left before the first light of dawn. There was a point of land, a high rocky outcrop of grey stone above the grey sea, and beyond this point, Herger told me, would be the town of Yatlam. I strained to see this fabled home of Bullywuff as the Northman's vessel came around the cliff. The warriors laughed and cheered more loudly. And then there was the smell of smoke on the sea, and we saw smoke, and all the men fell silent. As we came around the point, I saw with my own eyes that the town there was in smouldering flames and billowing black smoke. There was no sign of life. Bullywuff and his warriors landed and walked the town of Yatlam. There were dead bodies of men and women and children, some hacked by swords, a multitude of corpses. Bullywuff and the warriors did not speak, and yet even here there was no grief, no crying and sadness. Never have I seen a race that accepts death as the Northmen do. I myself was sick many times at the sights, and they were never so. At last I said to Herger, "Who has done this?" Herger pointed into the land. There were mists over the forests. He pointed and did not speak. I said to him, "Is it the mists?" He said to me, "Do not ask more. You will know sooner than you wish." Now this happened. Bullywuff entered one smoking ruined house and returned to our company bearing a sword. This sword was very large and heavy, and so heated by the fire that he carried it with a cloth wrapped around the handle. Verily, I say, it was the largest sword I have ever seen. It was as long as my own body, and the blade was flat and broad as the palms of 2 men's hands. It was so large and heavy that even Bullywuff grunted at the carrying of it. I asked Herger what was the sword, and he said, "That is Runding." And then Bullywuff ordered all his party to the boat, and we set out to sea again. None of the warriors looked back at the burning town of Yatlam. I alone did this, and I saw the smoking ruin and the mists in the hills beyond. For the space of 2 days, we sailed along a flat coast among many islands that are called the Land of Dans, coming finally to a region of marsh with a criss-cross of narrow rivers that pour onto the sea. These rivers have no names themselves, but are each one called Wike, and the people of the narrow rivers are called Vikings, which means the Northmen warriors who sail their ships up the rivers and attack settlements in such fashion.
There's some dispute among modern scholars about the origin of the term Viking, but most agree with Ibn Fadlan that it derives from Vik, meaning a creek or a narrow river.
Now in this marshy region we stopped at a place called Trelleborg, which was a wonder to me. Here is no town, but rather a military camp, and its people are warriors with few women or children among them. Trelleborg lies at the joining point of 2 Wikes. These then run to the sea. The main part of the town is encircled by a round earthwork wall as tall as 5 men. Above this earthen ring there stands a wooden fence for greater protection. Outside the earthen ring there is a ditch filled with water, the depth I do not know. And there is this further, on the landward side of the town, a second semicircle of high wall, and a second ditch beyond. The town itself lies within the inner ring. Inside the town stand 16 wooden dwellings, all the same. They are long houses, for so the Northmen call them. In length they are 30 paces. They are arranged thus: 4 long houses precisely set so as to form a square. 4 squares are arranged to make 16 houses in all. Every long house has but one entrance, and no house has its entrance within sight of another. I inquired why this was so, and Herger said thus: "If the camp is attacked, the men must run to defense, and the doorways are such that the men can hasten without mingling and confusion." Then also I saw that while the Northmen are gigantic, these doorways were so low that even I must bend in two to enter one of the houses. I inquired of Herger, who said, "If we are attacked, a single warrior may remain inside the house, and with his sword cut off the heads of all who enter. The door is low, so that heads will be bent for cutting." Verily, I saw that in all respects the Trelleborg town was constructed for warfare and for defense. No trading is conducted here at all. Now I saw that the Trelleborg people were not as the Northmen along the Volga. These were clean people for their race. They washed in the river, and relieved their waste out of doors, and were in all ways much superior to what I had known. Yet they are not truly clean, except in comparison. Bullywif and his company were graciously received by the chiefs of Trelleborg, who are several, foremost among them one who is called Sagard. Sagard is a strong and fierce man, almost as huge as Bullywif himself. During the night banquet, Sagard inquired of Bullywif his mission, and Bullywif reported the supplication of Wulfgar. Herger translated all for me, although in truth I had spent sufficient time among these heathens to learn a word or two in their tongue. Here is the meaning of the conversation of Sagard and Bullywif. Sagard spoke thus: "It is sensible for Wulfgar to carry out the errand of a messenger, though he is the son of the king Hrothgar, for the several sons of Hrothgar have set upon one another." Bullywif said that he did not know of this, or words to that meaning, but I perceived that he was not greatly surprised. Yet it is true that Bullywif was seldom surprised by anything. Such was his role as leader of the warriors and hero to them. Sagard spoke again. "Indeed, Hrothgar had 5 sons, and 3 are dead at the hand of one of them, Wiglif, a cunning man, whose conspirator in this affair is the herald of the old king. Only Wulfgar remains faithful, and he has departed." Bullywif said to Sagard that he was glad to know of this news, and would hold it in his mind, and there the conversation ended. Never did Bullywif or any of his warriors show surprise at the words of Sagard, and from this I took that it is ordinary for the sons of a king to dispose of one another to gain the throne. Upon our departure, I inquired of Herger why there should be another fortification on the landward side of Trelleborg, and yet no such additional fortification on the seaward side. These Northmen are seafaring men who attack from the sea, and yet Herger said, "It is the land that is dangerous because of the mists." Upon our departure from Trelleborg, the warriors assembled there beat their staves upon their shields, raising a loud noise for our ship which set sail. This, I was told, was to draw the attention of Odin, one of the number of their gods, so that this Odin would look with favor upon the journey of Bullywif and his 12 men. Also this I learned, that the number 13 is significant to the Norsemen, because the moon grows and dies 13 times in the passage of 1 year by their reckoning. For this reason, all important accountings must include the number 13. Thus Herger said to me that the number of dwellings in Trelleborg was 13, and also 3 more, instead of 16, as I have expressed it. Further, I learned that these Northmen have some notion that the year does not fit with exactitude into 13 passages of the moon, and thus the number 13 is not stable and fixed in their minds. The 13th passage is called magical and foreign, and Herger says, "Thus for the 13th man you were chosen as foreign." Verily, these Northmen are superstitious, with no recourse to sense or reason or law. They seemed to my eyes to be fierce children, and yet I was among them, and so held my tongue. Soon enough I was glad for my discretion, for these events followed. We were sailing some time from Trelleborg when I recalled that never previously had the inhabitants of a town made a departure ceremony with beating of shields to call up Odin. I spoke as much to Herger. "It is true," he responded. "There is a special reason for the call to Odin, for we are now upon the sea of monsters." This seemed to me proof of their superstition. I inquired if any of the warriors had ever seen such monsters. "Indeed, we have all seen them. Why else should we know of them?" By the tone of his voice, I could recognize that he thought me a fool for my disbelief. Some further time passed, when there was a shout, and all the warriors of Bullywhip stood pointing to the sea, watching, shouting amongst themselves. I asked Herger what had happened. "We are among the monsters now," he said, pointing. Then one of their number shouted to Odin, a scream of prayer, repeating the name many times, and then I also saw with my own eyes the sea monster. It was in the shape of a giant snake that never raised its head above the surface, yet I saw its body curl and twist over, and it was very long and wider than the Northman's boat, and black in colour. The sea monster spat water into the air like a fountain, and then plunged down, raising a tail that was cleft in two like the forked tongue of a snake. Now I saw another monster, and another after that. There appeared to be 4 and perhaps 6 or 7. At the sight, the Northmen shouted to Odin for aid, and not a few of their number fell to their knees on the deck trembling. Verily, I saw with my own eyes the sea monsters all about us in the ocean, and then, after some time had passed, they were gone, and we did not see them again. In the evening, we beached and made a fire, and I inquired of Herger if the sea monsters ever attacked a ship on the sea. Herger answered by calling Ecthgau. Herger said that he had been on a ship that was attacked. Ecthgau said this to me, that the sea monsters are larger than anything on the surface of the land, and larger than any ship on the sea, and when they attack, they ride under a ship and lift it in the air, and toss it aside like a bit of wood and crush it with their forked tongue. Ecthgau said that there had been 30 men on his ship, and only he and 2 others beside had survived. Ecthgau spoke in an ordinary manner of talking, which for him was very serious, and I believed him to be speaking the truth. Also, Ecthgau told me that the Northmen know that the monsters attack ships because they desire to mate with the ship, mistaking it for one of their own. For this reason, the Northmen do not build their ships overlarge. Herger said to me that Ecthgau is a great warrior renowned in battle, and that he is to be believed in all things.
This account of what is obviously a sighting of whales is disputed by many scholars. The Northmen knew about whales, and they distinguished them from sea monsters. Other scholars doubt that Ibn Fadlan could be unaware of the existence of whales, as he appears to be here.
For the next 2 days, we sailed among the islands of the Don country, and then on the 3rd day, we crossed a passage of open water, and eventually arrived at the territory called Venden. These lands of Venden are mountainous and forbidding, and the men of Bullywhip in his boat approached with some trepidation and the killing of a hen, which was thrown into the ocean thus. The head was thrown from the bow of the ship, and the body of the hen was thrown from the stern, near the helmsman. We did not beach directly on this new land of Venden, but sailed along the coast, coming at last to the kingdom of Hrothgar. I first saw it thus. High upon a cliff, commanding a view of the sea, was a huge great hall of wood, strong and imposing. I said to Herger it was a magnificent sight, but Herger and all his company, led by Bullywuff, were groaning and shaking their heads. I inquired of Herger why this was so. He said, "Hrothgar is called Hrothgar the Vain, and his great hall is the mark of a vain man." "Why do you speak thus? Because of its size and splendor? For verily, as we came closer, I saw that the hall was richly ornamented with carvings and silver chasing, which sparkled from a distance." "No," said Herger. "I say that Hrothgar is vain because of the way he has placed his settlement. He dares the gods to strike him down, and he pretends he is more than a man, and so he is punished." Never had I seen a more impregnable great hall, and I said to Herger, "This hall cannot be attacked. How can Hrothgar be struck down?" Herger laughed at me and said thus, "You Arabs are stupid beyond counting, and know nothing of the ways of the world. Hrothgar deserves the misfortune that has come to him, and it is only we who shall save him, and perhaps not even so." These words puzzled me further. I looked at Ecthgau, the lieutenant of Bullywuff, and saw that he stood in the boat and made a brave face, and yet his knees trembled, and it was not the stiffness of the wind that made them tremble so. He was afraid. They were all afraid, and I did not know why. Each warrior in the boat dressed in the garments of battle, which were thus: first, boots and legging of rough wool, and over this a coat of heavy fur, which reached to the knees. Over this they placed coats of mail, which all had, save me. Then each man took his sword and clasped it to his belt. Each man took up his white shield of hide, and his spear. Each man placed a helmet of metal or leather upon his head. In this all the men were the same, except for Bullywuff, who alone carried his sword in his hand, so large was it. The warriors looked up to the great hall of Hrothgar, and agreed that there was none like it in the world, with its lofty gables and rich carving. Yet there was no respect in their speech. At length we decamped from the ship, and travelled a road paved in stone up to the great hall. The clanking of swords and the clatter of mail raised a goodly noise. After we had gone some short distance, we saw by the roadway the severed head of an ox set upon a stick. The animal was freshly killed. All the Northmen sighed and made sad faces at this portent, though it had no meaning to me. I was by now adjusted to their custom of killing some beast at the slightest nervousness or provocation. Yet this ox head had especial significance. Bullywuff looked away across the fields of the lands of Hrothgar, and saw there an isolated farming house of the sort that is common in Hrothgar lands. The walls of this house were of wood. The roof is thatched material and wood also. Inside there is only an earthen floor and a hearth, and the dung of animals, for the farm people sleep with their animals indoors for the warmth afforded by their bodies, and then they burn the dung for fires. Bullywuff gave an order that we should go to this farmhouse, and so we set out across the fields. Once or twice Bullywuff halted his company and pointed to the dark earth. Verily, I saw with my own eyes the bare imprint of a foot, indeed of many feet. They were flat and uglier than anything known to creation. At each toe there was the sharp digging mark of a horned nail or claw. Thus the shape appeared human, but yet not human. This I saw with my own eyes, and could scarcely believe the witness of my sight. Bullywuff and his warriors shook their heads at the sight, and I heard them repeat one word over and over: Wendel or Wendlan, or some such. The meaning of the name was not known to me, and I sensed that Herger should not be asked at this moment, for he was as apprehensive as all the rest. We pressed on to the farmhouse, now and again seeing more of these horned footprints in the earth. Bullywuff and his warriors walked slowly, but it was not caution. No man drew his weapon. Rather, it was some dread that I did not comprehend, and yet felt with them. At length we came to the farming dwelling and entered it. In the farmhouse I saw with my own eyes this sight. There was a man of young age, whose body had been torn limb from limb. The torso was here, an arm there, a leg there. Blood lay in thick pools upon the floor, and on the walls, on the roof, on every surface in such profusion that the house seemed to have been painted in red blood. Also there was a woman, in like fashion, rended limb from limb. Also a male child, an infant of 2 years or less. All this I saw with my own eyes, and it was the most fearsome sight I ever witnessed. I purged myself and was faint for an hour, purging myself yet again. Never will I comprehend the manner of the Northmen, for even as I was sick, so they became calm and dispassionate at the aspect of this horror. They viewed all they saw in quiet fashion. They discussed the claw marks upon the limbs and the manner of tearing of flesh. Much attention was given to the fact that all the heads were missing. Also, they remarked the most devilish aspect of all, which even now I recall with trepidation. The body of the male child had been chewed by some fiendish teeth. This very horror I saw with my own eyes. The warriors of Bullywhiff were grim-countenanced and glowering as they departed the farmhouse. They continued to pay much heed to the soft earth about the house, noting that there were no hoof marks of horses. This was a matter of significance to them. I did not understand why, nor was I much attentive, still feeling faint of heart and sick of body. As we crossed the fields, Ecthgau made a discovery which was of this nature. It was a small bit of stone, smaller than a child's fist, and it was polished and carved in crude fashion. All the warriors crowded around to examine it, I among them. I saw it to be the torso of a pregnant female. There was no head, no arms, and no legs, only the torso with the great swollen belly, and above that, 2 pendulous swollen breasts. I accounted this creation exceedingly rude and ugly, but nothing more. Yet the Northmen were suddenly overcome and pale and tremulous. Their hands shook to touch it, and finally Bullywhiff flung it to the ground and shattered it with the handle of his sword until it lay in splintered stone fragments. And then were several of the warriors sick and purged themselves upon the ground, and the general horror was very great to my mystification. Now they set off for the great hall of King Hrothgar. No man spoke during our travel, which was better than an hour. The hall was surrounded on all sides by several dwellings in the fashion of the North people, but there were no fortifications or earthworks to be seen. Rather, from the great hall and the long houses about it, the ground sloped to a long flat green plain, here and there a farmhouse, and then, beyond, the hills and the edge of the forest. I inquired of Herger whose long houses were these, and he said to me, "Some belong to the king, and others are for his royal family, his nobles, and also for the servants and lower members of his court." He said also that it was a difficult place, though I did not comprehend the meaning in this. Then we were allowed entry in the great hall of King Hrothgar, which verily I say is to be counted one of the marvels of the world, and all the more for its presence in the crude north country. This hall is called among the Hrothgar peoples by the name of Hurot, for the Northmen give the names of people to the things of their life, to the buildings and boats, and especially to the weapons. Now I say this. This Hurot, the great hall, was as large as the Caliph's main palace, and richly inlaid with silver and even some gold, which is most rare in the north. On all sides were designs and ornaments of the greatest splendor and richness of artistry. It was truly a monument to the power and majesty of King Hrothgar. This King Hrothgar sat at the distant end of Heorot Hall, a space so vast that he was so far we could hardly discern him. Standing behind his right shoulder was a herald who bid us approach. King Hrothgar appeared a man near death. He was not young. His hair was white. His skin was very pale, and his face was grooved with sorrow and fear. Finally he broke into speech, which Herger says was thus: "I know of this man, for I have sent for him on a hero's mission. He is Bullywif." Hrothgar then called for the warriors to be summoned to the great hall, and gifts brought, and celebrations to be made. Bullywif then spoke a long speech that Herger did not translate for me, since to speak when Bullywif spoke would be a disrespect. However, the meaning was this, that Bullywif had heard of the troubles of Hrothgar, that his own father's kingdom had been destroyed by these same troubles, and that he had come to save the kingdom of Hrothgar from the evils that had beset them. Still, I did not know what the Northmen called these evils, or how they thought of them, though I had viewed the handiwork of the beasts that tore men to pieces. That evening there was a great celebration, and King Hrothgar and his wife Queen Wylju, in a garment dripping gemstones and gold, presided over the nobles and warriors and earls of the kingdom. These nobles were a paltry lot. They were old men and drank overmuch. In the eyes of all of them was the hollow stare of fear. Also there was the son named Wiglaf, of whom I have earlier spoken, the son of Hrothgar, who murdered 3 of his brothers. This man was young and slender, with a blond beard and eyes that moved about constantly. Also, he never met the gaze of another. Herger saw him and said, "He is a fox." By this he meant that he was a slippery and changeable person of false demeanor, for the North people believe the fox is an animal that can assume any form it pleases. Now, in the middle of the festivities, Hrothgar sent his herald to the doors of Heorot Hall, and this herald reported that the mist would not descend that night. There was much happiness and celebration over this announcement, that the night was clear. All were pleased, save Wiglaf. At a particular time, the son Wiglaf rose to his feet and said, "I drink honor to our guests, and especially Bullywif, a brave and true warrior who has come to aid us in our plight, although it may prove too great an obstacle for him to overcome." Herger whispered these words to me, and I caught that it was praise and insult in one breath. All eyes turned to Bullywif for his response. Bullywif stood and looked to Wiglaf and then said, "I have no fear of anything, even the callow fiend that creeps at night to murder men in their sleep." This I took to refer to the Wendell, but Wiglaf turned pale and gripped the chair in which he sat. "Do you speak of me?" Bullywif made this response. "No, but I do not fear you any more than the monsters of the mist." The young man Wiglaf persisted, although Hrothgar the king called for him to be seated. "This Bullywif, arrived from foreign shores, has by appearance great pride and great strength. Yet have I arranged to test his mettle, for pride may cover any man's eyes." Now I saw this thing happen. A strong warrior, seated at a table near the door, behind Bullywif, rose with speed, plucked up a spear, and charged at the back of Bullywif. All this happened in less time than it takes a man to suck in his breath. Yet also Bullywif turned, plucked up a spear, and with this he caught the warrior full into the chest and lifted him by the shaft of the spear high over his head and flung him against a wall. Thus was this warrior skewered on the spear. Now there came much commotion, and Bullywhiff turned to face Wiglaf and said, "So shall I dispatch any menace." Now the night passed with further celebrations, and all the warriors of Bullywhiff disported in a carefree fashion. I saw the son Wiglaf glaring at Bullywhiff before leaving the hall, but Bullywhiff paid no attention, preferring the ministrations of slave girls and freeborn women. After a time, I slept. In the morning, I awoke to the sounds of hammering, and venturing from the great hall of Heorot, I found all the peoples of the kingdom of Hrothgar at work on defences. These were being laid out in preliminary fashion. Horses drew up quantities of fence posts, which warriors sharpened to points. Bullywhiff himself directed the placement of defence works. Upon the middle portion of the day, the woman who was called the Angel of Death came and cast the bones, and announced that the mist would come that night.
This is not the same Angel of Death who was with the Northmen on the banks of the Volga. Apparently, each tribe had an old woman who performed shamanistic functions, and was referred to by that tribe as the Angel of Death.
Upon hearing this, Bullywhiff called for all work to cease, and a great banquet to be prepared. I inquired of Herger why there should be a banquet, but he replied to me that I had too many questions. It is also true that I had timed my inquiry badly, for he was posturing before a blonde slave girl who smiled warmly in his direction. Now, in the latter part of the day, Bullywhiff called together all his warriors and said to them, "Prepare for battle," and they agreed, and wished luck to one another. The night banquet was much as the previous one, although there were fewer of Hrothgar's nobles and earls. Indeed, I learned that many would not attend at all, for fear of what would happen in the Heorot Hall that night, for it seemed that this place was the centre of the fiend's interest in the area. The banquet was not enjoyable to me, for reason of my apprehension of coming events. However, this event occurred. One of the elderly nobles spoke some Latin, and I engaged him in conversation. In this circumstance, I feigned knowledge that I did not have, as you shall see. He spoke to me thus: "So, you are the foreigner who shall be the number 13? You must be exceedingly brave," the old man said, "and for your bravery I salute you." To this I made some trifling polite response, of the sense that I was a coward compared to the others of Bullywhiff's company, which indeed was more than true. "No matter," said the old man, who was deep in his cups, having drunk the liquor of the region, a vile substance they call mead. "You are still a brave man to face the Wendel." Now I sensed that I might finally learn some matters of substance. I repeated to this old man a saying of the Northmen: "Animals die, friends die, and I shall die. But one thing never dies, and that is the reputation we leave behind at our death." The old man cackled toothlessly at this. He was pleased I knew a Northman proverb. "That is so, but the Wendel have a reputation too." And I replied with the utmost indifference, "Truly? I am not aware of it." At this, the old man said that I was a foreigner, and he would consent to enlighten me, and he told me this: "The name Wendel, or Windan, is a very ancient name, as old as any of the peoples of the North Country, and it means the black mist. To the Northmen, this means a mist that brings under cover of night black fiends who murder and kill and eat the flesh of human beings. The fiends are hairy and loathsome to the touch and smell. They are fierce and cunning. They speak no language of any man, and yet converse among themselves. They come with the night fog, and disappear by day, to where no man durst follow." I expressed over great wonderment at his tale, in order to draw further words from the old man. Herger saw me then, gave me a menacing look, but I paid him no heed. The old man continued thus. In olden days, the black mist was feared by all the Northmen. Since my father and his father before, no Northman has seen the black mist, and some of the young warriors counted us old fools to remember the ancient tales. Yet the chiefs of the Northmen in all the kingdoms, even in Norway, have always been prepared for the return of the black mist. All of our towns and our fortresses are protected and defended from the land, and never have we seen the black mist. I inquired why the black mist had returned, and he lowered his voice to speak this reply. The black mist has come from the vanity and weakness of Hrothgar, who has offended the gods with his foolish splendor, and tempted the fiends with the sighting of this great hall, which has no protection from the land. The gods have sent the black mist to strike him down and show him humility. I said to this old man that perhaps Hrothgar was resented in the kingdom. He replied thus, No man is so good as to be free from all evil, nor so bad as to be worth nothing. Hrothgar is a just king, and his people prospered all of his life. I desired to know more, but the old man was tired, and turned away from me, and soon was asleep.
For Ibn Fadlan, with his extensive erudition, the notion of cannibalism may have implied some difficulties in the afterlife. The eater of the dead is a well-known creature of Egyptian mythology, a fearsome beast with the head of a crocodile, the trunk of a lion, and the back of a hippopotamus. This eater of the dead devours the wicked after their judgment.
Of the table of Hrothgar I shall say this, that every man had a tablecloth and plate, and spoon and knife, that the meal was boiled pork and goat and some fish. Then there were cabbages and onions in abundance, and apples and hazelnuts. A sweetish, fleshy meat was given me that I had not tasted before. This, I was told, was elk or reindeer. The dreadful foul drink called mead is made from honey, then fermented. It is the sourest, blackest, vilest stuff ever invented by any man, and yet it is potent beyond all knowing. A few drinks, and the world spins. But I did not drink, praise Allah. Now I noticed that Bullywhip and all his company did not drink that night, or only sparingly, and Hrothgar took this as no insult, but rather acknowledged it as the natural course of things. There was no wind that night, and yet it was damp and chill. I saw with my own eyes that the mist was rolling down from the hills, blocking the silvered light of the moon, cloaking all in blackness. As the night continued, King Hrothgar and his queen departed for sleep, and the massive doors of Heorot Hall were locked and barred, and the nobles and earls remaining there fell into a drunken stupor and snored loudly. Then Bullywhip and his men, still wearing their armor, went about the room, dousing the candles, and seeing to the fires that they should burn low and weak. I asked Herger the meaning of this, and he told me to pray for my life and to feign sleep. I was given a weapon, a short sword, but it was little comfort to me. I was not a warrior, and knew it full well. Verily, all the men feigned sleep. How long we waited I do not know, for I think I slept a while myself. Then all at once I was awake, in the manner of unnatural sharp alertness. It was dark night. The candles in the hall burned low, and a faint breeze whispered through the hall and fluttered the yellow flames. And then I heard a low, grunting sound, like the rooting of a pig, and I smelled a rank odor like the rot of a carcass after a month, and I feared greatly. This rooting sound, this grumbling, grunting, snorting sound, grew louder and more excited. It came from outdoors, at one side of the hall. Then I heard it from another side, and then another and another. Verily, the hall was surrounded. I sat up on one elbow, my heart pounding. No man among the sleeping warriors moved, and yet there was Herger, lying with his eyes wide open. And there, too, Bullywhip, breathing in a snore, with his eyes also wide open, waiting to do battle with the Wendell, whose sounds now filled the air. By Allah, there is no fear greater than that of a man when he does not know the cause. I remembered this, that the Northmen have a saying of praise that they carve upon the tombstones of noble warriors, which is this: he did not flee battle. None of the company of Bullywhip fled that night, though the sounds and the stink were all around them. Then there came the most fearsome moment. All sounds ceased. Still, none of the warriors of Bullywhip stirred. And then there was a mighty crash upon the solid doors of the Hall of Heorot, and these doors burst open, and a rush of reeking air gutted all the lights, and the black mist entered the room. I did not count their number. Verily, it seemed thousands of black, grunting shapes, and yet it might have been no more than 5 or 6 huge black shapes, hardly in the manner of men, and yet also manlike. The air stank of blood and death. I was cold beyond reason and shivered, yet still no warrior moved. Then, with a curdling scream to wake the dead, Bullywhip leapt up, and in his arms he swung the giant sword Runding, which sang like a sizzling flame as it cut the air. And his warriors leapt up with him, and all joined the battle. I myself had no stomach for battle, and yet I was set upon by one of these mist monsters, who came close to me, and I saw gleaming red eyes. Verily, I saw eyes that shone like fire, and I smelled the reek, and I was lifted bodily and flung across the room as a child flings a pebble. I struck the wall and fell to the ground, and was greatly dazed for the next period, so all around me was more confused than true. I remember most distinctly the touch of these monsters upon me, especially the furry aspect of the bodies, for these mist monsters have hair as long as a hairy dog, and as thick on all parts of their bodies, and I remember the fetid smell of the breath of the monster who flung me. The battle raged for how long I cannot know, but it concluded most suddenly of a moment, and then the black mist was gone, slunk away, grunting and panting and stinking, leaving behind destruction and death that we could not know until we had lighted fresh tapers. Here is how the battle waged. Of the company of Bullywhip, 3 were dead, Ronath and Halga, both earls, and Edgtho, a warrior. The first had his chest torn open, the second had his spine broken, the third had his head torn off in the manner I had already witnessed. All these warriors were dead. Wounded were 2 others, Haltoth and Rethel. Haltoth had lost an ear, and Rethel 2 fingers of his right hand. Both men were not mortally injured, and made no complaining, for it is the Northman way to bear the wounds of battle cheerfully, and to praise above all the retaining of life. As for Bullywhip and Herger, and all the others, they were soaked in blood as if they had bathed in it. Now I shall say what many will not believe, and yet it was so. Our company had killed not one of the mist monsters. Each had slunk away, some perhaps mortally wounded, and yet they had escaped. Herger said thus: I saw 2 of their number carrying a 3rd who was dead. Perhaps this was so, for all generally agreed upon it. I learned that the mist monsters never leave one of their kind to the society of men, but rather will risk great dangers to retrieve him from human purview. So also will they go to extreme lengths to keep a victim's head, and we could not find the head of Edgtho in any place. Then Bullywhip spoke, and Herger told me his words thus: Look, I have retained a trophy of the night's bloody deeds. See, here is an arm of one of the fiends. And, true to his word, Bullywhip held the arm of one of the mist monsters, cut off at the shoulder by the great sword Runding. I perceived it thusly. It appeared to be small, with a hand of abnormally large size, but the forearm and upper arm were not large to match it, although the muscles were powerful. There was long black matted hair on all parts of the arm, except the palm of the hand. Finally, it is to say that the arms stank as the whole beast stank, with the fetid smell of the black mist. Now all the warriors cheered Bullywhip and his sword Runding. The fiend's arm was hung from the rafter of the great hall of Heorot, and marvelled at by all the people of the kingdom of Hrothgar. Thus ended the first battle with the Wendol. Verily, the people of the North Country never act as human beings of reason and sense. After the attack of the mist monsters, and their beating back by Bullywhip and his company, with me amongst them, there was no celebration, no feasting, no jubilation, or display of happiness. Contrary to any expression of pleasure, King Hrothgar made a long face, and seemed more fearful than he had been before. Nor was Bullywhip different in manner. Yet it was only in laying out the dead warriors that Bullywhip and his comrades showed happiness, or allowed themselves any smiles. I learned that they smile upon any death in battle, for this is pleasure taken on behalf of the dead person. The Northmen believe how a man dies determines his condition in the afterlife, and they value the death of a warrior in battle above all. They show distress when a man dies in his sleep or in a bed. They say of such a man, "He died as a cow in the straw." Now the Northmen, who drink much liquor, and at all hours of the day and night, drink nothing on the day after the battle. This I found most puzzling, and spoke of it finally to Hörger. Hörger shook his shoulders in the Northmen's gesture of unconcern or indifference. "Everyone is afraid, because they know that the black mist will return." Now I admit that I was puffed with the arrogance of a fighting man, though in truth I knew I did not deserve such a posture. Even so, I felt exhilaration at my survival, and the people of Hrothgar treated me as one of the company of mighty warriors. I said boldly, "Who cares for that? If they come again, we shall beat them a second time." Indeed, I was vain as a young cock, and I am abashed now to think upon my strutting. Hörger responded, "The kingdom of Hrothgar has no fighting warriors or earls. They are all long since dead, and we alone must defend the kingdom. Yesterday we were 13, today we are 10, and of that 10, 2 are wounded and cannot fight as full men. The black mist is angered, and it will take a terrible vengeance. They will return as Korgon." "What is Korgon?" "The glowworm dragon which swoops down through the air." Now this seemed fanciful, but I had already seen the sea monsters just as they said that such beasts truly lived, and I saw Hörger's strained and tired countenance, and I perceived that he believed in the glowworm dragon. Verily, even as he spoke, I saw that Bullywhip, though he had slept not at all during the night, was directing anew the building of defences around the hall of Heorot. All the people of the kingdom worked. This is what they did. About the perimeter of Heorot and the adjacent buildings, Bullywhip erected a kind of fence of crossed lances and poles with sharpened points. I could not see the value of this defence, for men could scale it easily. I spoke of this to Hörger, who called me a stupid Arab. Hörger was in an ill temper. Now a further defence was constructed, a ditch outside the pole fence, 1.5 paces beyond. This ditch was not deep, never more than a man's knees, and unevenly dug. And in places, short lances were sunk in the earth, points upward. I understood the value of this paltry ditch no better than the fence, but I did not inquire of Hörger, already knowing his mood. Instead, I aided the work as best I could, pausing only once to have my way with a slave woman in the Northman's fashion, for in the excitement of the night's battle and the day's preparations, I was most energetic. With the progression of the day, I saw clearly that the defences of Bullywhip would not be completed by nightfall. Upon nightfall, work was halted, and to my perplexity, Hrothgar held another banquet of splendid proportions. This evening while I watched, Bullywhip and Herger and all the other warriors drank much mead and revelled as if they lacked any worldly cares, and had their way with the slave women, and then all sank into a stuporous, droning sleep. Now this night, while all the warriors of Bullywhip slept, I was too afraid to drink or laugh. I feared the return of the Wendell. But they did not return, and I also eventually slept, but fitfully. Now, with the fall of darkness, the mist crept down from the hills, slinking as fingers around the trees, seeping over the green fields towards the hall of Hurot and the waiting warriors of Bullywhip. Here there was a respite in work. From a fresh spring, water was diverted to fill the shallow ditch, and then I understood the sense of the plan. For the water concealed the stakes and deeper holes, and thus the moat was treacherous to any invader. Further still, the women of Hrothgar carried goatskin sacks of water from the well, and doused the fence and the dwelling and all the surface of the hall of Hurot with water. So also the warriors of Bullywhip drenched themselves in their armour with water from the spring. The night was damp cold, and thinking this is some heathen ritual, I begged excuses, but to no end. Herger doused me head to foot like the rest. I stood dripping and shivering. In truth, I cried aloud at the shock of the cold water, and demanded to know the reason. "The glowworm dragon breathes fire," Herger said to me. Then he offered me a cup of mead to ease the chill, and I drank this cup of mead without a pause, and was glad for it. Now the night was fully black, and the warriors of Bullywhip awaited the coming of the dragon Corgon. All eyes were turned toward the hills, now lost in the mist of night. Verily, Bullywhip and all his company kept watchful vigil that night, and I among them. After a time I slept, and Herger woke me thus, and brusquely, "If you sleep, you will miss the battle." I said in response that that would be no hardship according to my own way of thinking. Now Skeld gave a shout, and all the warriors of Bullywhip, myself among them, turned to look at the hills behind the blanket of mist. Here is what I saw. High in the air, a flowing, fiery point of light, like a blazing star and a distance off. All the warriors saw it, and there was murmuring and exclamation among them. Soon appeared a second point of light, and yet another, and then another. I counted past a dozen, and then ceased to count further. These glowing fire points appeared in a line which undulated like a snake, or verily like the undulating body of a dragon. "Be ready now," Herger said to me, and also the Northmen saying, "Luck in battle." This wish I repeated back to him in the same words, and he moved away. The glowing fire points were still distant, yet they came closer. Now I heard a sound which I took as thunder. Now I watched and listened, and the glowworm dragon of Corgon bore down upon us in thunder and flame. Each blazing point of light grew larger, and baleful red, flickering and licking. The body of the dragon was long and shimmering, a vision most fierce of aspect, and yet I was not afraid, for I determined now that these were horsemen with torches, and this proved true. Soon then, from out of the mist, the horsemen emerged, black shapes with raised torches, black steeds hissing and charging, and the battle was joined. Immediately, the night air filled with dreadful screams and cries of agony, for the first charge of the horsemen had struck the trench, and many mounts tumbled and fell, spilling their riders, and the torches sputtered in the water. Other horses tried to leap the fence, to be impaled on the sharp stakes. A section of the fence caught fire. Warriors ran in all directions. Now I saw one of the horsemen ride through the burning section of the fence, and I could see this Wendell clearly for the first time. And verily I saw this. On a black steed rode a human figure, but his head was the head of a bear. I was startled with a time of most horrible fright, and I feared I should die from fear alone, for never had I witnessed such a nightmare vision. Yet at the same moment the hand-axe of Ecthgau was buried deep into the back of the rider, who toppled and fell, and the bear's head rolled from his body, and I saw that he had beneath the head of a man. Quick as a lightning bolt, Ecgtheow leapt upon the fallen creature, stabbed deep into the chest, turned the corpse, and withdrew his hand-axe from the back, and ran to join the battle. I also joined the battle, for I was knocked spinning from my feet by the blow of a lance. I came to my feet just as one of the mist monsters bore down upon me with charging steed. Verily I did this. I stood firm my ground, and held my lance upward, and the impact I thought would rend me. Yet the lance passed through the body of the rider, and he screamed most horribly, but he did not fall from his mount, and rode on. I fell, gasping with pain in my stomach, but I was not truly injured, save for the moment. During the time of this battle, Högr and Skeld loosed their many arrows, and the air was filled with their whistles, and they reached many marks. Now I also saw this. A rider swept into the compound, bent low on his galloping horse, and he caught up the body of the monster Ecgtheow had slain, swung it over his horse's neck, and rode off. For as I have said, these mist monsters leave no dead to be found in the morning light. The battle raged on a goodly period of time by the light of the blazing fire through the mist. I saw Högr in mortal combat with one of the demons. Taking up a fresh lance, I drove it deep into the creature's back. Högr, dripping blood, raised an arm in thanks, and plunged back into the combat. Here I felt great pride. Now I withdrew my lance, and whilst doing so, was knocked aside by some passing horseman, and from that time, in truth, I remember little. Upon the dawn I roused, and now I saw that I lay in the ditch, where the water was red as blood itself. I arose and walked through the smoking compound past all manner of death and destruction. I saw the earth was soaked in blood, as from a rain, with many puddles. I saw the bodies of slain nobles, and dead women and children likewise. No cries or mourning came from the kingdom of Hrothgar, for the North people do not lament any death, but on the contrary, there was unusual stillness in the air. I heard the crowing of a cock and the bark of a dog, but no human voices in the daylight. Then I entered the great hall of Heorot, and here found 2 bodies laid upon the rushes, with their helmets upon their chests. There was Skeld, an earl of Bullywif. There was Helfdene, earlier injured and now cold and pale. Both were dead. Also there was Hrethel, youngest of the warriors, who sat upright in a corner and was attended by slave women. Hrethel had been wounded previously, but he had a fresh injury in his stomach, and there was much blood. Surely it pained him greatly, and yet he showed only cheer, and he smiled and teased the slave women as they attempted to bind his wounds. If a warrior is wounded in the abdomen, they feed him a soup of onions and herbs. Then the women smell about his wounds, and if they smell onions, they say, "He has the soup illness," and they know he shall die. I saw with my own eyes the women prepare a soup of onion for Hrethel, who drank a quantity of this, and the slave women smelled at his wound, and they smelled the odor of onion. At this Hrethel laughed and made some manner of hearty joke, and called for mead, which was brought to him, and he showed no trace of any care. Now Bullywif, the leader, and all his warriors conferred in another place in the great hall. I joined their company, but was accorded no greeting. I had learned some of the Norse speech, but not sufficient to follow their low and quickly spoken words, and so I walked to another place, and drank some mead, and felt the aches of my body. Then a slave woman came to bathe my wounds. These were a cut in the calf and another on my chest. Now Högr came to me, for the conference of the warriors was at an end. The slave woman attending me had made my wounds burn most distractingly, yet I was determined to maintain a Northman show of great cheer. I said to Högr, "What trifling matter shall we undertake next?" Högr looked to my wounds and said to me, "You can ride well enough." I inquired where I would be riding, and in truth at once lost all my good cheer, for I had great weariness, and no strength for aught but resting. Högr said, "Tonight the glowworm dragon will attack again. but we are now too weak and our numbers too few. Our defenses are burned and destroyed. The glow-worm dragon will kill us all." These words he spoke calmly. I saw this, and said to Herger, "Where then do we ride?" I had in mind that by reason of their heavy losses, Bullywif and his company might be abandoning the kingdom of Hrothgar. In this I was not opposed. Herger said to me, "A wolf that lies in its lair never gets meat, or a sleeping man victory." This is a Northman proverb, and from it I took a different plan, that we were going to attack on horseback the mist monsters where they lay, in the mountains or the hills. With no great heart I inquired of Herger when this should be, and Herger told me, "In the middle part of the day." Now I saw also that a child entered the hall, and carried in his hands some object of stone. This was examined by Herger, and it was another of the headless stone carvings of a pregnant woman, bloated and ugly. Herger shouted an oath, and dropped the stone from his trembling hands. He called upon the slave woman, who took the stone and placed it in the fire, where the heat of the flames caused it to crack and splinter into fragments. These fragments were then thrown into the sea, or so I was informed by Herger. I inquired what was the meaning of the carved stone, and he said to me, "That is the image of the mother of the eaters of the dead. She who presides over them and directs them in their eating." Now I saw that Bullywif, who stood in the centre of the great hall, was looking up at the arm of one of the fiends, which still hung from the rafters. Then he looked down at the two bodies of his slain companions, and at the waning Rethel, and his shoulders fell, and his chin sank to his chest. And then he walked past them and out of the door, and I saw him put on his armour and take up his sword, and prepare for battle anew. Bullywif called for 7 sturdy horses, and in the early part of the day we rode from the great hall of Hrothgar out into the flat plain, and thence toward the hills beyond. With us also were 4 hounds of pure white colour, great animals which I should count nearer to wolves than dogs, so fierce was their demeanour. This made the totality of our attacking forces, and I believed it a weak gesture against so formidable an opponent. Yet the Northmen place great faith upon surprise and a sly attack. Also, by their own reckoning, they are each man the equal of 3 or 4 of any other. Our direction of travel was determined by the trail of blood the retreating horsemen had left from the night. The hounds led, racing along their red, dripping trail. At length we rode into the hills, without hesitation or ceremony. Each of the warriors of Bullywif held the marks of fear upon their faces, and yet no man paused or faltered, but pressed onward. Now it was cold in the hills, in the forests of dark green trees, and a chill wind blew at our clothing, and we saw the hissing breath of the steeds. After some travel, we arrived at a new landscape. Here was a brackish tarn, no moor or heath, a desolate land most resembling a desert, yet not sandy and dry, but damp and soggy, and over this land lay the faintest wisps of mist. The Northmen called this place the Desert of Dread. Now I saw with my own eyes that this mist lay upon the land in small pockets, or clustering like tiny clouds. I found this sight remarkable, but the Northmen took it to be nothing special. They said the land in this region has many brackish pools and bubbling hot springs which rise from the ground. The land is difficult for horses, and we made slower progress. We proceeded for a goodly distance. Now at a place the dogs halted. There was no difference in the terrain, or any mark or object upon the ground, yet the dogs stopped as if they had arrived upon some fence or palpable obstruction. Bullywif said, "Here begins the land of the Wendell." The Northmen say, "Fear has a white mouth," and now I saw that this is true, for they were all pale around the lips and mouth. No man spoke of his fear. Now we left the dogs behind, and rode onward into more snow, which was thin and crunching underfoot, and into thicker mists. Now we sighted another obstacle, grey and distant and large. Here was a giant rock, as high as a horse's saddle, and it was carved in the shape of a pregnant woman, with bulging belly and breasts, and no head or arms or legs. This rock was spattered with the blood of some sacrifices. Verily, it dripped with streaks of red, and was gruesome to look upon. The warriors drew out their swords and held them in readiness. We rode on apace. I smelled now the rotting carcass odour that I had smelled before in the great hall of Hrothgar, and as it reached my nostrils anew, I was faint of heart. Herger rode alongside me and said in a soft voice, "How do you fare?" Not being capable of concealing my emotions, I said to him, "I am afraid." "That is because you think upon what is to come, and imagine fearsome things that could stop the blood of any man. Do not think ahead, and be cheerful by knowing that no man lives forever." I saw the truth of his words. "In my society," I said, "we have a saying which is, 'Thank Allah, for in his wisdom he put death at the end of life, and not at the beginning.'" Herger smiled at this and laughed briefly. "In fear even Arabs speak the truth," he said, and then rode forward to tell my words to Bullywhip, who also laughed. The warriors of Bullywhip were glad for a joke at that time. Now we came to a hill, and reaching the crest, paused and looked down upon the encampment of the Wendell. Here is how it lay before us, as I saw with my own eyes. There was a valley, and in the valley a circle of rude huts of mud and straw, of poor construction, as a child might erect, and in the centre of the circle a large fire now smouldering. Yet there were no horses, no animals, no movement, no sign of life of any kind, and this we saw through the shifting gauze of the mist. "The Wendell are creatures of the night, even as owls or bats," Herger said, "and they sleep during the hours of the day. So they are sleeping now, and we shall descend into their company, and fall upon them, and slay them in their dreams." "We are so few," I said, for there were many thus below which I perceived. "We are enough," Herger said, and then he gave me a draught of mead, which I drank gratefully, with praise to Allah that it is not forbidden, or even disapproved of. In truth, I was finding my tongue hospitable to the very substance I once thought vile. Thus do strange things cease to be strange upon repetition.
The Islamic injunction against alcohol is literally an injunction against the fermented fruit of the grape, that is, wine. Fermented drinks of honey are specifically permitted to Muslims.
Fortified, the warriors of Bullywhip, and I among them, left our steeds upon the hill, and warily descended. We moved in stealth, and soon we were in the very heart of the village of the demons. And then, with a howl, Bullywhip raised his great sword Runding, and led the attack. I dashed with Herger into one of the huts, blood pounding in my head, my sword light as a feather in my hands. Verily, I was ready for the mightiest battle of my life. I saw nothing inside. The hut was deserted, and barren as well, save for rude beds of straw, so clumsy in their appearance they seemed more to resemble nests of some animal. We dashed outside, and attacked the next of these mud huts. Again we found it empty. Verily, all the huts were empty, and the warriors of Bullywhip took glowing embers from the fire, and set the huts aflame. They burned slowly, for they were damp. And thus we climbed up the hill, mounted our horses, and left the region of the Wendell, and departed the desert of dread. And all the warriors of Bullywhip were now sad of aspect, for the Wendell had surpassed them in cunning and cleverness, abandoning their lair in anticipation of the attack, and they would count the burning of their dwellings no great loss. We returned as we had come, but rode with greater speed, for the horses now were eager, and eventually came down from the hills and saw the flat plain, and in the distance at the ocean's edge the settlement and the great hall of Hrothgar. Now Bullywhip veered away and led us in another direction, toward high rocky crags swept by the ocean winds. I rode alongside Herger and inquired the reason for this, and he said we were to seek out the dwarves of the region. At this I was much surprised, for the men of the north have no dwarves among their society. They are never seen in the streets, nor do any sit at the feet of kings, nor are any to be found counting money, or keeping records, or any of the things we know of dwarves.
In the Mediterranean, from Egyptian times, dwarves were thought to be especially intelligent and trustworthy, and tasks such as bookkeeping and money handling were reserved for them.
Now we came to a region of caves, hollowed and windswept, and Bullywhip dismounted from his horse, and all the warriors of Bullywhip did likewise, and proceeded by foot. I heard a hissing sound, and verily I saw puffs of steam issue from one and another of these several caves. We entered one cave, and there found dwarves. They were in appearance thus: of the ordinary size of dwarf, but distinguished by hands of great size, and bearing features that appeared exceedingly aged. Each dwarf wore a garment of fur or sable. Each also wore a thin belt of hide decorated with bits of hammered gold. The dwarves greeted our arrival politely, with no sign of fear. Herger said these creatures have magic powers, and need fear no man on earth. Herger said this also, that the appearance of great age among the dwarves was a true thing, and that a dwarf lived beyond the span of any ordinary man. Now I saw that the hissing and steam issued from great cauldrons, into which hammered steel blades were plunged to temper the metal, for the dwarves make weapons that are highly prized by the Northmen. Indeed, I saw the warriors of Bullywhip looking about the caves eagerly, as any woman in a bazaar shop selling precious silks. Bullywhip made inquiries, and was directed to the topmost of the caves, wherein sat a single dwarf, older than all the others, with a beard and hair of purest white, and a creased and wrinkled face. This dwarf was called Tengol, which means a judge of good and evil, and also a soothsayer. This Tengol must have had the magical powers that all said he did, for he immediately greeted Bullywhip by his name, and bade him sit with him, and we gathered a short distance away, standing. The Tengol spoke in a high voice as a child, and Herger told me the meaning was thus:
"Oh, Bullywhip, you are a great warrior, but you have met your match in the monsters of the mist, the eaters of the dead. This shall be a struggle to the death, and you shall need all your strength and wisdom to overcome the challenge. To kill the Wendell, you must strike at the head and the heart. You must overcome their very mother in the Thunder Caves."
I did not understand the meaning of these words.
"You know of this, for it had always been true through all the ages of man. Shall your brave warriors die one by one, or shall you strike at the mother in the caves? Here is no prophecy, only the choice of a man or a hero."
Now Bullywhip made some response, but it was low, and lost to me in the howl of the wind that raked the entrance to the cave. Whatever the words, the dwarf spoke further.
"That is the hero's answer, Bullywhip, and I would expect none other from you. Thus shall I help your quest."
Then a number of his kind came forward into the light from the dark recesses of the cave, and they bore many objects.
"Here," said the Tengol, "are lengths of rope made from the skins of seals caught at the first melting of the ice. These ropes will help you attain the ocean entrance to the Thunder Caves."
"I thank you," Bullywhip said.
And here also, the Tengol said, are 7 daggers forged with steam and magic for you and your warriors. Great swords will be of no avail in the Thunder Caves. Carry these new weapons bravely, and you shall accomplish all you desire.
Bullywhip took the daggers and thanked the dwarf. He stood. "When shall we do this thing?" he asked.
Yesterday is better than today,
The Tengol replied.
so make haste and carry out your intentions with a firm heart and a strong arm.
"And what follows if we succeed?" Bullywhip asked.
Then the Wendell shall be mortally wounded and thrash in its death throes of final time, and after this last agony, the land shall have peace and sunlight forevermore, and your name shall be sung glorious in all the halls of the Northlands forevermore."
"The deeds of dead men are so sung," Bullywhip said.
"That is true,"
The dwarf said and laughed.
"and also the deeds of heroes who live, but never are sung the deeds of ordinary men. All this you know."
Now Bullywhip departed from the cave, and gave to each of us the dagger of the dwarves, and we descended from the rocky windswept crags, and returned to the kingdom, and the great hall of Hrothgar as night was falling. All these things took place, and I saw them with my own eyes. No mist came that night. In the great hall of Hrothgar, a mighty feast was held, and Bullywhip and all his warriors joined in great celebration. Bullywhip himself ravished 6 slave girls, and perhaps more, but despite merrymaking, neither he nor his warriors were truly cheerful. Now I joined in the general revelry, for I felt as one of them, having spent much time in their company, or so it seemed. Indeed, that night I felt I had been born a Northman. Herger, much intoxicated, told me freely of the mother of the Wendell. He said this:
"The mother of the Wendell is very old, and she lives in the caves of thunder. These thunder caves have 2 openings, one from the land and another from the sea. But the entrance from the land is guarded by the Wendell, who protect their old mother. Therefore we shall attack from the sea."
I inquired of him, "What is the nature of this mother of the Wendell?" Herger said that no Northman knew this thing, but that it was said among them that she was old, older than the old crones they call the Angel of Death, and also that she was frightful to look upon, and also, too, that she was strong beyond all accounting. And he said at the last that the Wendell called upon her to direct them in all their affairs of life. Then Herger turned from me and slept. Now this event occurred. In the depths of the night, as the celebrations were drawing to a close, and the warriors were drifting into sleep, Bullywhip sought me out. He sat beside me and drank mead from a horned cup, and he spoke slowly in the North tongue, so that I should understand his meaning. He said first to me, "Did you comprehend the words of the dwarf Tengol?" I replied that I did, with the help of Herger. "Then you know I shall die." I did not know any reply or response to make, but finally said to him in the North fashion, "Believe no prophecy until it bears fruit." Bullywhip said, "You have seen much of our ways. Tell me what is true. Do you draw sounds?" I answered that I did. "Then look to your safety, and do not be over-brave. You dress, and now you speak as a Northman, and not a foreign man. See that you live." I placed my hand upon his shoulder, as I had seen his fellow warriors do to him in greeting. He smiled then. "I fear no thing," he said, "and need no comfort. I tell you to look to your own safety for your own account. Now it is wisest to sleep." So speaking, he turned away from me, and devoted his attention to a slave girl, whom he pleasured not a dozen paces from where I sat, and I turned away, hearing the moans and laughter of this woman, and at length I fell into a sleep. Before the first pink streaks of dawn lighted the sky, Bullywhip and his warriors, myself among them, rode out from the kingdom of Hrothgar and followed the cliff edge above the sea. On this day I did not feel fit, for my head ached. Also was my stomach sour from the celebration of the previous night. Surely all the warriors of Bullywhip were in like condition, yet no man gave signal of these discomforts. Herger carried upon his horse the sealskin ropes of the dwarfs, and I rode up to travel alongside him. I inquired what was our purpose on this day. Herger said to me, "On this morning we attack the mother of the Wendol in the Thunder Caves. This we shall do by attacking from the sea, as I have told you yesterday." While I rode, I looked from my horse down at the sea, which smashed upon the rock cliffs. "Do we attack by boat?" "No," Herger said, and slapped his hand upon the sealskin ropes. Then I took his meaning to be that we should climb down the cliffs on the ropes, and thereby in some fashion make an entrance into the caves. I was much frightened at this prospect, for never have I liked to be exposed upon the high places. I said as much. Herger said to me, "Be thankful. If you have the fear of high places, then this day you shall overcome it, and so you shall have faced a great challenge, and so you shall be adjudged a hero." I said to him, "I do not want to be a hero." At this he laughed, and said that I expressed such an opinion only because I was an Arab. Then also he said that I had a stiff head, by which the Northman means the aftermath of drinking. This was true, as I have already told. Also, I was in ill temper. To Herger I said, "You and Bullywhip and all your company may be heroes as suits your temper, but I have no part in this affair, and shall not number as one of you." At this speech Herger laughed. Then he called to Bullywhip and spoke a rapid speech. Bullywhip answered him back, over his shoulder. Then Herger spoke to me. "Bullywhip says that you will do as we do." "I cannot do this thing. If you force me to do it, I shall surely die." "How shall you die?" "I shall lose my grip on the ropes." This answer made Herger laugh heartily yet again, and he repeated my words to all the Northmen, and they all laughed at what I had said. Then Bullywhip spoke a few words. Herger said to me, "Bullywhip says that you shall lose your grip only if you release the ropes from your hands, and only a fool would do such a thing. Bullywhip says you are an Arab, but no fool." Now, here is a true aspect of the nature of men, that in his fashion Bullywhip said that I could climb the ropes, and for his speech I believed it as much as he, and was cheered in my heart to a slight degree. This Herger saw as he spoke these words. "Each person bears a fear which is special to him. One man fears a close space, and another fears drowning. Each laughs at the other and calls him stupid. Thus, fear is only preference, to be counted the same as the preference for one woman or another, or mutton for pig, or cabbage for onion. We say fear is fear." Now Herger laughed at my face, and spoke these words. "Praise Allah, for he put death at the end of life, and not at the beginning." Curtly I said in reply that I saw no benefit in hastening the end. "Indeed, no man does," Herger responded to me, and then he said, "Look to Bullywhip.
See how he sits straight. See how he rides forward, though he knows he shall soon die.
I answered, I do not know he shall die.
Yes,
Herger said,
but Bullywif knows.
Now well I know that these Northmen are brave to a fault, but as I looked at the precipice of the cliff below us, my heart twisted over inside my chest, and I thought I should be purging myself at any instant. Verily, the cliff was absolutely sheer, lacking the least grip for hand or feet, and it descended for the distance of perhaps 400 paces. Verily, the crashing waves were so far beneath us that they appeared as miniature waves, tiny as the most delicate drawing of an artist. To me, the climbing down of these cliffs was madness beyond the madness of a foaming dog, but the Northmen proceeded in normal fashion. Bullywif directed the pounding of the stout wooden stakes into the earth. Around these the sealskin ropes were bound, and the trailing ends flung over the sides of the cliffs. Then Bullywif spoke to his gathering.
First I shall proceed, so that when I reach the bottom all shall know that the ropes are stout and the journey can be accomplished. I await you at the bottom on the narrow ledge you see below.
I looked to this narrow ledge. To call it narrow is to call a camel kind. It was in truth the barest strip of flat rock, continually washed and pounded by the surf.
When all have reached the bottom,
Bullywif said,
we can attack the mother of the Wendell in the Thunder Caves.
Now here is the manner of his descent. A sling is placed around the waist of the descending man, and all his fellows strain to lower him down the cliff. Meanwhile, this same man grips for support onto the second rope, which dangles on the cliff face. Further, the descending man carries a stout staff of oaken wood, fitted at one end with a leather thong, or strap about his wrist. This staff he employs for a prod to push himself hither and yon as he moves down the rocky surface. As Bullywif went down, becoming ever smaller to my eyes, I saw that he maneuvered with the sling, the rope, and the stick very agilely, but I was not deceived into thinking this some trivial matter, for I saw it to be difficult and requiring practice. At length he safely reached the bottom and stood on the narrow ledge with the surf crashing over him. In truth, he was so diminished we could hardly see him wave his hand in signal that he was safe. Now the sling was hauled up, and also with it the oaken staff. Herger turned to me, speaking,
You shall go next.
I said that I was feeling poorly. Also, I said I wished to see another man descend, in order better to study the manner of the descent. Herger said,
It is more difficult with each descent because there are fewer here above to lower a man down. The last man must descend without the sling at all, and that shall be Ecthgau, for his arms are iron. It is a mark of our favor which allows you to be the second man to descend. Go now.
I saw in his eyes that there was no hope of delay, and so I was myself fitted into the sling, and I gripped the stout staff in my hands, which were slippery with sweat, and my whole body likewise was slippery with sweat, and I shivered in the wind as I went over the side of the cliff, and for the last time saw the 5 Northmen straining at the rope, and then they were lost from view. I made my descent. In truth, I remember little from all that transpired, only this. In due time, which in truth seemed as the whole duration of my life and more, I reached the bottom, and Bullywif clapped me on the shoulder and said I had done well. Now I sought to hold my balance upon this slippery ledge, and this so occupied my attention, I did not watch the others coming down the cliff. My only desire was this, to keep from being swept away into the sea. Verily I saw with my own eyes that the waves were taller than 3 men. Many times I was knocked from my feet by these waves. I was drenched over my whole body, and shivering so badly that I could not speak words for the clacking of my teeth. Now all the warriors of Bullywhip made their descent, and all were safe. Then Bullywhip spoke. "We shall descend into the water and swim into the cave. I shall be first." These words of new madness came upon me at a time when I could endure nothing further. To my eyes, the plan of Bullywhip was folly beyond folly. I saw the waves crash in, bursting upon jagged rocks. I saw the waves pull away again with the tug of a giant's strength, only to recover their power and crash forward anew. Verily I watched, and I believed that no man could swim in that water, but rather he would be dashed to bony splinters in an instant. But I made no protest, for I was past any comprehension. Bullywhip watched the movement of the waves, choosing his time, and then he leapt into the surf. I hesitated, and someone, I have always believed it to be Herger, pushed me. I fell deep in the swirling sea of numbing coldness. Then I perceived Bullywhip kicking down in the depths of the sea, and I followed after him, and he swam into a kind of passage in the rocks. In all things I did as he. Now it is true that my lungs burned as if afire, and I knew in my heart that I could not continue much longer in this icy sea. Then the surge ran forward, and I was flung headlong, knocked here and there, and then suddenly I was up and breathing air. I gasped, and all the warriors of Bullywhip set their heads above the surface and gasped likewise. Now, here is what I saw. We were in a kind of pond or lake, inside a cave, with a smooth, rocky dome and a seaward entrance through which we had just traversed. Directly ahead was a flat rocky space. I saw 3 or 4 dark shapes squatted about a fire. These creatures chanted in high voices. Now also I understood why this was called the Cave of Thunder, for with each crash of the surf, the sound in the cave reverberated with such power that the ears ached and the very air seemed to shake and press. In this place, this cave, Bullywhip and his warriors made their attack, and I joined in with them, and with our short daggers we killed the 4 demons in the cave. I saw them clearly for the first time in the flickering light of the fire. They were short creatures, and broad and squat, and hairy on all parts of their bodies, save their palms, the soles of their feet, and their faces. Their faces were very large, with mouth and jaws large and prominent, and of an ugly aspect. Also their heads were larger than the heads of normal men. Their eyes were sunk deep in their heads. The brows were large, and not by virtue of hairy brows, but of bone. Also their teeth were large and sharp. One of the creatures was slow to die, and with its tongue formed some sounds which had to my ear a quality of speech, but I cannot know if this was so, and I tell it again with no conviction of the matter. Then we heard a ghostly echoing chant, a sound rising and falling in time to the thunder pounding of the surf, and this sound came from the recesses of the cave. Bullywhip led us into the depths. There we came upon 3 of the creatures, prostrate upon the ground, faces pressed to the earth, and their hands raised in supplication to an old creature lurking in the shadow. These suppliants were chanting, and did not perceive our arrival. But the creature saw us, and screamed hideously at our approach. This creature I took to be the mother of the Wendell, but if she was a female, I saw no sign, for she was old to the point of being sexless. Bullywhip alone fell upon the suppliants and killed them all, while the mother creature moved back into the shadows and screamed horribly. I could not see her well, but this much is true, that she was surrounded by serpents, which coiled at her feet and upon her hands and around her neck. These serpents hissed and flicked their tongues, and as they were all about her, upon her body and also on the ground, none of the warriors dared make an approach. Then Bullywuff attacked her, and she gave a fearful scream as he plunged his dagger deep into her breast, for he was heedless of the snakes. Many times he struck the mother of the Wendell with his dagger. Never did this woman collapse, but always did she stand, though the blood poured from her as if from a fountain, and from the several wounds Bullywuff inflicted upon her, and all the time she screamed a most frightful sound. Then at last she toppled and lay dead, and Bullywuff turned to face his warriors. Now we saw that this woman, the mother of the eaters of the dead, had wounded him. A silver pin, such as a pin for hair, was buried in his stomach. This same pin trembled with each heartbeat. Bullywuff plucked it forth, and there was a gush of blood. Yet he did not sink to his knees, mortally wounded, but rather he stood and gave the order to leave the cave. This we did by the second and landward entrance. This entrance had been guarded, but all the Wendell guards had fled before the screams of their dying mother. We departed without harassment. Bullywuff led us from the caves and back to our horses, and then did he collapse on the ground. Ecthcow, with a face of sadness most uncommon among the Northmen, directed the fashioning of a stretcher, and with this we carried Bullywuff back across the fields to the kingdom of Hrothgar. Now we came to the kingdom of Hrothgar, where we were greeted with cheers and happiness, and no sadness, although Bullywuff was direly injured. A bowl of onion broth was brought for him, and he refused it, saying, "I have the soup illness. Do not trouble yourselves on my account." Then he called for a celebration, and insisted that he preside over it, and he drank mead, and he was merry. I was near to him when he said to King Hrothgar in the midst of the festivities, "I have no slaves." "All of my slaves are your slaves," Hrothgar said. Then Bullywuff said, "I have no horses." "All of my horses are yours," Hrothgar answered. "Think no more on these matters." And Bullywuff, his wounds bound, was happy, and he smiled. And although I would not have thought it possible, he ravished a slave girl, and afterward he said to me as a joke, "A dead man is no use to anyone." And then Bullywuff fell into a sleep, and his colour became more pale, and his breathing more shallow. I feared he should never wake from this sleep. So also I fell into a sleep. Hrothgar awakened me with these words, "The Wendell come. They know of the mortal wounds of Bullywuff, and they seek a final revenge for the killing of their mother." Each of the warriors of Bullywuff, myself among them, took a place at the perimeter of the fortifications that we had drawn up against the Wendell. These defences were poor, yet we had none else. We peered into the mists to glimpse the horsemen galloping down upon us. I expected great fear, but I did not feel this, for I had seen the aspect of the Wendell, and I knew them to be creatures, if not men, then like enough to men as monkeys are also like men. But I knew them to be mortal, and they could die. Thus I had no fear, save the expectation of this final battle. In this manner was I alone, for I saw that the warriors of Bullywuff displayed much fear. Verily, as we had killed the mother of the Wendell, who was their leader, so also had we lost Bullywuff, who was our own leader. And then I heard a commotion behind me, and upon my turning, I saw this. Bullywuff, pale as the mist itself, garbed in white and bound in his wounds, stood erect upon the land of the kingdom of Hrothgar, and on his shoulders sat 2 black ravens, one to each side. And at this sight the Northmen screamed of his coming, and they raised their weapons into the air and howled for the battle. Now the ravens flew off, and Bullywuff gripped his sword Runding and met the attack. No words can describe the final attack of the Wendell in the dawn of the mist. No words will say what blood was spilled, what screams filled the thick air, what horses and horsemen died in hideous agony. With my own eyes, I saw Ecthgau with his arms of steel. Verily, his head was lopped off by a Wendel sword. I myself killed 3 of the Wendel, and suffered a spear in the shoulder, which pain was like a plunge into fire. I thought I should collapse, and yet I fought on. Now the sun burst through the mist, and the dawn was full upon us, and the mist slipped away, and the horsemen disappeared. In the broad light of day, I saw bodies everywhere, including many bodies of the Wendel, for they had not collected their dead. This truly was the sign of their end, for they were in disarray and could not again attack Hrothgar, and all the people of the kingdom of Hrothgar knew this meaning and rejoiced. Högr bathed my wound and was elated, until they carried the body of Bullywif into the great hall of Hrothgar. Bullywif was dead a score over. His body was hacked by the blades of a dozen adversaries. Högr saw this sight and burst into tears, and turned his face from me. But there was no need, for I myself felt tears that misted my sight. Now of the party of Bullywif, once the number 13, only 4 remained. I among them, we set out Bullywif beneath a wooden roof, and left his body with a cup of mead in his hands. Then Högr said to the assembled people, "Who shall die with this noble man?" And a woman, a slave of King Hrothgar, said she would die with Bullywif. The usual preparations of the Northmen were then made.
Although Ibn Fadlan doesn't specify any passage of time, several days probably elapsed before the funeral ceremony occurred.
Now a ship was fitted out upon the shore below the hall of Hrothgar, and treasures of gold and silver were laid upon it, and the carcasses of 2 horses also. Then the slave girl was taken to each of the warriors of Bullywif, and to me also, and I had carnal knowledge of her. And she said to me, "My master thanks you." Her countenance and manner were most joyful. This was the nature of the thing. So then I said this, "Tell your master when you see him that I have lived to write." These words I do not know if she comprehended. I said to her, "It was the wish of your master." "Then I will tell him," she said, and most cheerfully proceeded to the next warrior of Bullywif. Now in the evening, as the sun was making its descent into the sea, the ship of Bullywif was prepared upon the beach, and the maiden was taken into the tent of the ship, and the old crone, who is called the Angel of Death, placed the dagger between her ribs, and I and Högr held the cord that strangled her, and we seated her alongside Bullywif, and then we departed. All of this day I had taken no food or drink, for I knew I must participate in these affairs, and I had no wish to suffer the embarrassment of purging myself. But I felt no revulsion at any of the deeds of that day, nor was I faint or light of head. For this I was proud in secret. Also, it is true that at the moment of her death, the maiden smiled, and this expression afterward remained, so that she sat next to her master with this same smile upon her pale face. Now the ship of Bullywif was set aflame, and pushed out into the sea, and the Northmen stood upon the rocky shore, and made many invocations to their gods. With my own eyes, I saw the ship carried by the currents as a burning pyre, and then it was lost to vision, and the darkness of night descended upon the Northlands. Now I passed some further weeks in the company of the warriors and nobles of the kingdom of Hrothgar. This was a pleasant time, for the people were gracious and hospitable, and most attentive to my wounds, which healed well, praise Allah. But it happened soon enough that I desired to return to my own land. To King Hrothgar I made known I was the emissary of the Caliph of Baghdad, and that I must complete the business he had sent me upon, or incur his wrath. None of this mattered to Hrothgar, who said I was a noble warrior, that he desired I should remain in his lands, to live the life of such an honored warrior. Now I went to Hrothgar, speaking of my plight, and Hrothgar said he would arrange for my departure with the king. Here was the manner of it. Hrothgar sought the audience of King Hrothgar in private, and said to him that of the 5 sons of the king, only one survived, and he was Wulfgar, who had gone to Bullywif as messenger, and now remained far off. Hrothgar said that Wulfgar should be summoned home, and that a party for this purpose be arranged, for there was no other heir save Wulfgar. Then it happened at an evening banquet that Hrothgar called for the fitting out of a ship and a crew, for a voyage to return Wulfgar to his kingdom. I requested to join the crew, and this the old king could not deny me. The preparation of the ship took the space of several days. I spent much time with Hrothgar in this interval. Hrothgar had chosen to remain behind. In truth, it was a sad leave-taking, and I was heavy-hearted to depart from Hrothgar and the remainder of the warriors. Hrothgar felt this also. I gripped his shoulder, and he mine, and then I set out upon the black ship, which carried me to the land of the Dons. As this ship, with her stout crew, slipped away from the shores of Vendon, I had view of the gleaming rooftops of the great hall of Heorot, and turning away, of the grey and vast ocean before us. Now it happened.
The manuscript ends abruptly at this point, and although there is clearly more, further passages have never been discovered. This is, of course, the purest historical accident, but every translator has commented on the odd appropriateness of this abrupt ending, which suggests the start of some new adventure, some strange new sight, that for the most arbitrary of reasons of the past 1,000 years will be denied to us. Ibn Fadlan's description of the mist monsters suggests Neanderthal anatomy, and raises the question whether the Neanderthal did, in fact, disappear from the earth thousands of years ago, or whether these early men persisted into historic times. Arguments based on analogies cut both ways. There are historical examples of a handful of other people with technologically superior culture wiping out a more primitive society in a matter of years. That's largely the story of European contact with the New World. But there are also examples of primitive societies existing in isolated areas, unknown to more advanced, civilized peoples nearby. Such a tribe was recently discovered in the Philippines. I should probably tell you something about how I came to write this novel. Eaters of the Dead was originally conceived on a dare. In 1974, my friend Kurt Willitson said he wanted to teach a college course that he would call The Great Bores. This course would include all the texts that were supposedly crucial to Western civilization, but which were, in fact, no longer read willingly by anyone because they were so tedious. Kurt said that the first of the great bores that he would address was the epic poem Beowulf. I disagreed. I said that Beowulf was a dramatic, exciting story, and I said I could prove it. I went home and immediately began making notes for this novel. What sort of narrative would be most desirable? I concluded the most useful account would be written by an outsider, someone not part of the culture, who could report objectively on the events as they occurred. On reflection, I realized I already knew of such a person. Back in the 10th century, an Arab named Ibn Fadlan had traveled from Baghdad into what is now Russia, where he came in contact with the Vikings. His manuscript, which is well known to scholars, provides one of the earliest eyewitness accounts of Viking life and culture. But for me as a novelist, he had several advantages. First, his style was imitable. Second, he was believable. And third, he was unexpected. And after 1,000 years, I felt that Ibn Fadlan would not mind being revived in a new role, as an eyewitness to the events that led to the epic poem of Beowulf. I obtained the existing manuscript fragments and combined them, with only slight modifications, into the beginning of Eaters of the Dead. I then wrote the rest of the novel in the style of the manuscript to carry Ibn Fadlan on the rest of his now fictional journey. While I was writing, I felt that I was drawing the line between fact and fiction very clearly. For example, one of my cited translators, Per Fraus Dolus, means literally in Latin, by trickery, deceit. But within a few years, I could no longer be certain which passages were real and which I had made up. I mention this because the tendency to blur the boundaries of fact and fiction has become widespread in modern society. Fiction is now seamlessly inserted into everything from scholarly histories to television news. Of course, television is understood to be venal, its transgressions shrugged off by most of us. But the attitude of postmodern scholars represents a more fundamental challenge. Some in academic life now argue seriously that there's no difference between fact and fiction, that all ways of reading text are arbitrary and personal, and that therefore pure invention is just as valid as hard research. At best, I think this attitude evades traditional scholarly discipline. At worst, it can be nasty and dangerous. But such academic views were not prevalent 20 years ago, when I sat down to write this novel in the guise of a scholarly monograph. When Eaters of the Dead was first published, this playful version of Beowulf received a rather irritable reception from many reviewers, as if I had desecrated a monument. But Beowulf scholars all seem to enjoy it, and many have written to say so.
Among the many other titles by Michael Crichton available on audio from Random House are Airframe, read by Blair Brown, The Lost World, read by Anthony Heald, Jurassic Park, read by John Hurd, Sphere, read by Edward Asner, and Disclosure, read by John Lithgow. This has been a Random House Audiobooks presentation.